Greetings and welcome to Fan Fiction Reader. I'm thrilled to bring fanfiction to life through audio. I put a lot of effort into these readings, so if you're enjoying the journey, please consider giving the video a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. Your support means a lot. Now, let's dive into the story.
Chapter 21. The Problem with the Lake Water. Zhao Hai woke up in the evening. It was already getting dark. Merlin and the others had also returned. To save on supplies, Merlin and the others generally didn't go out at night. Even if they didn't use magic stones for lighting, torches or oil lamps still needed oil, and they had to save every bit of resource they could. When Zhao Hai woke up, it was already getting dark. The slaves had already eaten dinner, and they were free to move around the castle until bedtime. Anyway, there was no need to worry about them escaping, so it was good to let them relax. Now the slaves were sitting in the castle courtyard chatting. Compared to other places, they were living in paradise here. They could eat their fill every day, didn't have to do heavy work, and had enough rest time. They loved this kind of life. Originally, they were a bit desperate when they arrived here. They had heard about the situation in the black soil wilderness, even though they were slaves. Nothing grew here except for a barren mountain, and it was next to the corpse swamp. Such a place was a dead end, and they always thought they would starve to death in this place. But they didn't expect that. Although they had only been here for 2 days, they could clearly see that their master was really capable. He could actually use magic to turn the black soil that couldn't grow anything into fertile land, so they wouldn't have to worry about starving to death in the future. These people were just slaves, and they had never seen anyone use magic. In their impression, magicians were omnipotent and magic was incredibly magical. Better living conditions than before, an attitude that treated them like commoners, the temptation to escape their slave status, plus incredibly magical magic. All of these things combined were enough to make these slaves loyal to Zhao Hai. An enormous cohesive force formed invisibly. Now these slaves were no longer working passively, but were focused on working harder to escape their slave status sooner. Zhao Hai stood quietly at the castle, watching the slaves outside. He really wanted to go up and chat with these slaves, but he also knew that now was not the time. These slaves had been oppressed for a long time, and they would be very nervous when they saw nobles. Don't even mention chatting with them, they would probably kneel there, not daring to raise their heads. It's easy to change a person's status, but it's hard to change their thinking. It's a long-term process to gradually change their thinking, so Zhao Hai didn't contact those slaves now. The time wasn't right yet. Doing anything requires a gradual process. Being too hasty might ruin things, and even if it succeeds, it might cause an unstable foundation. Undoubtedly, the completion of the land improvement and the hope of escaping slave status filled these slaves' lives with hope, and they were no longer as lifeless as they were when they first arrived. Zhao Hai liked seeing the slaves' performance like this. Only people full of hope have creativity and can maximize their abilities. At this moment, a knock on the door rang, and Zhao Hai suddenly came back to his senses and said in a deep voice, "Come in." The door was pushed open, and Meg stood at the door, looking at Zhao Hai and said, "Young master, dinner is ready, it's time to eat." Wood and stone were still standing outside, guarding the door for Zhao Hai. Zhao Hai nodded. He also knew that it was about time to eat, but Zhao Hai was really a little embarrassed. These past 2 days, Merlin and the others had not only been busy managing the slaves, but also cooking for him. It was really too tiring. But although Zhao Hai could cook, he didn't dare to. Don't forget his identity. He was now a pampered young master who did nothing himself. It was reasonable for him to have space abilities. After all, this was a continent where magic and martial arts coexisted, and there were all kinds of strange people and strangers. His skills were not particularly conspicuous, but if he suddenly knew how to cook, it would arouse Merlin and Meg's suspicion. The few people arrived at the restaurant and found that Merlin and the others had already set the table with food, still bread and some vegetables, plus a piece of meat and a soup. To be honest, a native Chinese person really couldn't get used to this stuff, but there was no way. Even if Hai wanted to eat Chinese food, no one here would know how to make it. Only he knew how to make it, but he didn't dare to, so frustrating. After eating a few mouthfuls, Zhao Hai said, "Grandma Merlin, I think what we did today was too rash. We better not improve the land here tomorrow." Merlin was stunned and looked at Zhao Hai in confusion and said, "What's wrong, young master? Why do you say that? Is it impossible to improve the land anymore? If we can't improve the land, what will we do?" Zhao Hai understood what she meant and he immediately said, "Grandma Merlin, I think you've misunderstood. It's not that I can't improve the land anymore, but that I can't improve it near the castle. Think about it, our strength is still too weak. If those guys find out that we can turn this place into a cultivable land, will they let us go? We'll be finished then. Merlin had also seen great storms. Today, she was just overwhelmed by the joy of improving the land, so she didn't think of these things for a while. Now that Zhao Hai reminded her, Merlin immediately understood Zhao Hai's meaning. Zhao Hai was right. If the old nobles of the empire found out that they could improve the land here, they would definitely come to deal with them, and they would be finished then. Although the Buda family had signed an agreement with the empire, it was on the premise that the Buda family had an heir. If a noble family had no heir, then the king would take back the noble title of the family, and the fiefdom would naturally be taken back. It is a crime to possess a treasure, this is the truth. Merlin put down her knife and fork and nodded. What the young master said makes sense. We were inconsiderate. We were just focused on improving our lives and forgot that those old nobles might not let us go so easily. So what does the young master mean? Now Merlin was paying more and more attention to Zhao Hai's opinions, because Zhao Hai had indeed done a lot of things these past few days, and he had done everything in a proper manner. In addition, he had that special ability. Unconsciously, Merlin and the others had regarded Zhao Hai as the backbone. Zhao Hai also put down his cutlery and gently wiped his mouth with a napkin. Then he said, "The land improvement must continue, but it can't be improved around the castle. That's too conspicuous. As long as people come in, they can see it at a glance. It's too easy to be discovered. I want to look around and see if there is any place around here that is very hidden and can be improved. It doesn't have to be too big, just about 1,000 acres or so should be enough to meet the needs of the people here, so it's not easy to be discovered." Merlin nodded and said, "What the young master said is right. Then I'll have people look around tomorrow to see if there is a suitable place around here." "Then, young master, are we still raising blue-eyed rabbits and scaleless fish?" Zhao Hai said in a deep voice, "Yes, we must raise them. Anyway, scaleless fish are very easy to raise, and those people won't find out anything. Blue-eyed rabbits must be raised even more. They will only think that we are making a desperate struggle and won't care too much." Merlin nodded and said, "Okay, but there is a bit of a problem with the water. I found that there doesn't seem to be any fish in our moat, and there aren't any fish even in the lake in the cave. This seems very wrong." Zhao Hai was stunned. This was the first time he had thought of this problem. He used to be just a homebody, not a professional fisherman, so he didn't notice this at first. On the contrary, Merlin, the water magician, noticed it. Zhao Hai was a little puzzled. Logically speaking, there should be a lot of fish in the moat and the mountain lake. There was no problem with the water quality at all. He had already analyzed this in the space. How could there be no fish? Zhao Hai asked Merlin in confusion, "Grandma Merlin, do you know why this is?" "There is no problem with the water. I have analyzed it. It is a very good source of water and is completely suitable for fish to survive, but now I can't see any fish. This is a bit unreasonable, right?" Merlin frowned and said, after a while, "Generally, there are only two possibilities for there to be no fish in the water. One is that there is poison in the water, which is not suitable for fish to survive, and the other is that there are fierce water magic beasts in the water that have eaten all the fish. If it is really like what the young master said, that there is no poison in the water, then there is only the second possibility, that there are fierce water magic beasts in the water." Zhao Hai thought carefully and felt that what Merlin said made sense. He remembered that when he was on Earth, he had seen a news report that two very powerful carnivorous fish had entered a fisherman's fish pond and eaten all the fish in his pond. There might also be that kind of magic beast here. If that's the case, it would be a troublesome matter. When Merlin saw Zhao Hai frowning, she knew what Zhao Hai was thinking, and Merlin comforted him, "Young master, it's not difficult to solve this. If there is poison in the water, it won't be easy for us to solve, but if there are magic beasts causing trouble in the water, then we just need to find the magic beasts and kill them." Zhao Hai smiled bitterly. His thoughts were exactly the opposite of Merlin's. If there was poison in the water, he could easily detoxify it with space water, but if there were magic beasts in the water, it would really be troublesome. Merlin looked at Zhao Hai's still frowning expression and couldn't help but smile and said, "Young master, don't worry. If there are really magic beasts in the water, I will definitely find them and kill them. It won't affect the young master's fish farming plan." When Zhao Hai heard Merlin say this, he couldn't help but be stunned. Then he immediately understood. This is not Earth. On Earth, it is not easy to go into the sea to kill a deep-sea beast, but this is the Ark continent. There is very powerful magic here, and Merlin is a powerful water magician. Maybe she really has a way to eliminate the magic beasts in the water. Chapter 22 Maturity. Zhao Hai frowned and said, Will there be any danger? Grandma Merlin, if there is any danger, let's not raise fish for now. After all, no matter how important raising fish is, it's not as important as your safety. Merlin looked a little excited, but still smiled and said, "Young master, don't worry, nothing will happen. I am an 8th level water magician, dealing with a magical beast is easy." Seeing Merlin's confident look, Zhao Hai had no choice but to nod and say, "All right then, but this matter can be put off for now. Tomorrow we still need to organize people to take a good look around here to see where there is suitable land for us to improve. Improving the land first is the real deal." Merlin also nodded. Although commerce is very developed in Ark Continent, the Buda family does not value commerce very much. They are nobles and in their eyes, land is the key. Meg and the others did not interrupt. Now, when Zhao Hai and Merlin discuss matters, Meg and the others generally do not interrupt. Needless to say, Woodenhead and Stone, the two of them are not very smart. They do whatever they are told to do. Asking them for advice is like playing the lute to a cow. Although Meg is very smart, she is still too young and does not live in an era of information explosion like Zhao Hai, so she still has a lot to learn. She really can't get involved in the things that Zhao Hai and Merlin are talking about. Zhao Hai quickly finished his dinner, sat in the living room for a while drinking kia, and then returned to his room. There are only so many things to do in the castle now, just arrange them, and that's it, there's no need to worry too much. There is nothing to play here, it is completely isolated from the world. At night, there is really nothing to do except sleep. Zhao Hai returned to his room, also wanting to see the situation in the space as soon as possible. Now, when it gets to night, Zhao Hai feels very bored. When he was on Earth, he was a homebody, and homebodies usually sleep very late at night. These days since he arrived here, he was able to fall asleep at night because he was too busy, but today he slept during the day, so he can't fall asleep at night, so naturally he has to run to the space to take a good look. The space is still the same, but the corn seedlings have already grown and the radish seedlings have also grown. Fortunately, there are no bugs. Looking at those thriving seedlings, Zhao Hai's heart is also slightly excited. These small seedlings represent hope, his hope of surviving in another world. Zhao Hai doesn't have great ambitions, he just wants to live well in this other world. When he was on Earth, he was a homebody, earning a meager amount of royalties to make a living. He had no ambition, just wanting to live his own little life. Arriving in this other world, he obtained Adam's body, and also knew Adam's background, knowing that Adam now has a great revenge to avenge, but Zhao Hai also knows that Adam's revenge is not so easy to avenge. They have to face an empire. When the Buda family was at its most glorious, they were beaten into what they are now. With the strength they have now, it's good enough to be able to save their lives, let alone take revenge. Although he has the space farm as a cheat, the space farm has a big shortcoming, lack of offensiveness. The space farm is good, it can grow vegetables, it can store things, but it doesn't have any attack ability. On Ark Continent, the real experts are precisely the best at attacking. A magician like Merlin can kill 1,000 people with magic in an instant. Compared with Merlin, Zhao Hai is not even a newborn baby, he can only be regarded as an ant. If Merlin wants to crush him to death, it's just a matter of a finger. It is precisely because of this that Zhao Hai is wholeheartedly thinking about keeping a low profile. If those old nobles discover that he has such ability, they may kill him at the first moment. Fortunately, Zhao Hai completely received Adam's memory. Although Adam was an ignorant and incompetent person, he still knows some common sense about the continent. Zhao Hai is not the kind of brain-dead person who thinks that he is the boss as soon as he transmigrates, and that he is the third oldest in the world. He also wants to step on the ground and poke the sky for no reason. Zhao Hai doesn't have such great ambitions, and he also knows that if he really dares to be so high profile, the first to die will be him. The characteristics of the space farm determine that Zhao Hai cannot become an invincible master in the world. In addition, Adam has already drunk the water of nothingness, let alone becoming a master. He can't even become a low-level master. Now Zhao Hai's greatest reliance is nothing more than the space farm, but this kind of thing that he got suddenly also makes Zhao Hai feel uncertain in his heart. He is afraid that this thing that he got suddenly will be lost suddenly. This sense of urgency makes Zhao Hai constantly think about how to build up the fief as soon as possible. Although he can improve the black soil on the fief every day, it is precisely because of this that he is even more worried. When they arrive at the black soil wasteland, will those old nobles let them go? Not necessarily. Those guys will definitely send people to stare at them. If they really find that the movement here is too big, those old nobles will not be polite. Zhao Hai sat in the space, summarizing, and finally got only 2 words. Low-key. He only got 1 sentence. It's best to make a fortune in silence. Although he knew that the radishes and corn in the space were growing very well, Zhao Hai still watered them a little. Now he is taking care of these small seedlings with all his heart, which represents their hope. Watering in the space is also very convenient. Zhao Hai only needs to think about it. The spring water in the space seems to be lifted up by an invisible force, floating over the land, and then pouring down like rain. Looking at the slowly moistening land, Zhao Hai immediately stopped. He also knew that he couldn't water too much, otherwise the corn might rot. After everything was done, Zhao Hai came out of the space farm. He looked at the sky outside. It was completely dark. The slaves were already asleep and there were no lights on in the castle. The entire castle seemed to be asleep with the arrival of the night. In such a quiet environment, Zhao Hai's heart also slowly calmed down. He knew that it was useless for him to think about anything now. The road has to be taken step by step. Now, his main priority is to solve the problem of food for the 100 people in the castle. Not only must they eat their fill, but they must also eat well. Responsibility. Zhao Hai deeply felt this word. When he was on Earth, he was the kind of person who could feed himself and not worry about his family, but after arriving here, the problem of food, clothing, and housing for these 100 people, the future of the Buddha family, these heavy burdens were all placed on Zhao Hai's shoulders, so he was very careful with every step he took, for fear of making a mistake. Daring to take responsibility is also a sign of a man's maturity. Zhao Hai is now more mature than he was on Earth, because reality forces him to be mature. Standing quietly in front of the window for a while, Zhao Hai then returned to bed. Even if he couldn't sleep, he had to go back to bed and lie down. Now they are short of supplies and he can't waste them. Unconsciously, he fell asleep in bed again. Ding dong, the radishes are ripe, please collect them as soon as possible. The farm's prompt sound woke Zhao Hai up again. He sat up and immediately entered the space. Sure enough, the radishes in the space were ripe and the corn had grown more than 1 person tall. The corn cobs on top had basically taken shape. At this time, they could be broken off and boiled to eat. But Zhao Hai didn't move. He was still counting on these corn to be seeds. Breaking off a few now doesn't seem like much, but if he waits for these corn to mature and takes them outside as seeds, then he can plant a lot of land. Zhao Hai immediately collected the radishes, and then immediately bought a bag of radish seeds from the space store and planted them in the ground. Then he washed himself thoroughly with the space spring water, and his whole person became energetic. Zhao Hai then ran to the cornfield and carefully looked at the corn. The corn was growing very well, and the corn cobs were already glazed. As long as he waits for them to officially mature, he can collect them. Zhao Hai then nodded in satisfaction, left the space farm, and returned to his room. He looked out the window, and the sky was already slightly bright. Zhao Hai no longer felt sleepy, opened the door, and walked out. The outside space is still very good. Although the castle is on a barren mountain, it can be considered to have mountains and water. In addition, it is only April now and it is still a bit cool in the morning. After breathing in 2 mouthfuls of slightly cool air, Zhao Hai couldn't help but feel happy. There is nothing to do getting up so early. Zhao Hai thought that his body didn't seem to be very good. Adam used to be an ignorant and incompetent playboy who was greedy for alcohol and sex, which had already ruined his body. In addition, he drank the water of nothingness, which made his body even weaker. Zhao Hai didn't want to become a sickly person early on. In addition, the weather was so good, Zhao Hai decided to run and exercise first. Even if he couldn't become a master, he had to become a healthy person at least. After running for a while, the slaves woke up one after another, and they all looked at Zhao Hai running in the castle in surprise, not knowing what he was doing. Zhao Hai's body is really too weak now. He was already panting after running for a while. There was no way, he had to stop, slowly adjust his breathing, and return to the castle. Although he only ran for a while, he still felt refreshed, and his whole person became a lot more energetic. When Zhao Hai returned to the castle, Merlin and the others had already gotten up, but Merlin and the others did not expect Zhao Hai to get up so early. They thought that Zhao Hai was still sleeping in the room. When they saw Zhao Hai coming in from the outside, they were all very surprised. Zhao Hai greeted them, washed his face, and then came to the living room, sitting there waiting for Merlin to make breakfast. Chapter 23, Confession. After breakfast, Merlin had Meg lead the slaves to continue organizing the caves, preferably cutting down all the trees on the mountain to see if they could be made into a small boat, so they could have a good look at the mountain lake. Merlin himself was preparing to take a good look around the castle to see if he could find a place suitable for them to improve the land. In Merlin's view, land improvement was the top priority. Only when the land was improved could they have a foundation for survival and hope for the future. Although she didn't know what was going on with Zhao Hai's space farm, she could tell at a glance that Zhao Hai could improve the land and produce 40,000 kilograms of radishes at once, which meant that Zhao Hai's ability was related to agriculture. Although Merlin didn't know the magic of the space farm, she was a smart woman, and with her age and rich life experience, she could guess 7 or 8 out of 10. But seeing that Zhao Hai didn't tell her, she didn't ask any more questions. She knew that Zhao Hai was in charge now and he was much more decisive than before. If she pressed him, it would seem inappropriate. When Zhao Hai heard that Merlin wanted to go around the castle to inspect the terrain, he insisted on going with her. In the few days he had been in this different world, he had either been in the castle, wandered around the mountain, or been busy in the space. He had never seen the surrounding area. Today was a good opportunity to take a good look around. After all, this was his territory. Zhao Hai wanted to go with them, and Mutu and Shitu naturally wanted to follow, but Zhao Hai didn't let them. He only took Mutu and left Shitu to help Meg look after the slaves. Zhao Hai was really worried about leaving Meg alone to watch over 100 slaves. Zhao Hai and the others came out of the castle. Mutu walked alone on the mountain, carefully looking at the terrain. Zhao Hai and Merlin walked along the foot of the mountain. Merlin was old and a magician, so her body was naturally not very good. Zhao Hai was the same. Therefore, the two did not go up the mountain, fearing that they would be too tired to move after walking for a while. Merlin and Zhao Hai were also leaving the castle for the first time, looking around as they walked. It must be said that the black soil wilderness was really unique. The semicircular mountain was only covered with some short trees and weeds, and the mountains surrounded a large plain that stretched as far as the eye could see. There was nothing to see, it was all too obvious. Only the terrain on the mountain was a bit more complicated, but because the mountain was not very high and there were not many trees, the terrain on the mountain could be seen clearly from the foot of the mountain, so there was no need to worry too much. The two had been walking along the foot of the mountain for more than 3 hours, and other than feeling more and more desolate, they had not found anything. The black soil was still black soil, and the barren mountain was still a barren mountain. Zhao Hai looked around and turned to Merlin and said, "Grandma Merlin, let's rest for a while. Our fief is too big to see in a day or two. If it doesn't work, we'll wait for Grandpa Green to come back and ride out on horseback. It's too tiring to walk like this now." Merlin was also exhausted. She was a magician, not a warrior, and her body was not strong at all. She could do some housework normally, but she really couldn't handle traveling like this. The two casually found 2 rocks to sit on. When Mutu saw the two sitting down, he immediately ran down the mountain and walked to Zhao Hai's side and said, "Young master, you rest here first, I'll go look around." Zhao Hai nodded and said, "Okay, go ahead, be careful." Mutu responded and turned to run up the mountain again. He didn't seem tired at all. Merlin sat on the rock, looking at the endless black soil in front of her, and sighed quietly. "When we first heard that the Empire had given us this place, we were really desperate. Everyone knew that the black soil wilderness was a dead land, where nothing grew, and it was also close to the corpse marsh. We were assigned here, and we really couldn't do anything but wait for death." At this point, she stopped, lowered her head, and a look of reminiscence appeared in her eyes. When Green heard the news, he immediately took all the money from home to buy various supplies. He also wanted us to hold on for a few more years. As long as those old nobles didn't pay attention to us in a few years, we would think of other ways to make money. No matter what, we can't let the Buda family die in our hands. Speaking of this, Merlin was silent for a while, as if recalling the desperate scene at that time. Zhao Hai didn't speak either. He could understand Merlin's feelings. The Buda family was the place where they were born and raised, but they could only watch the Buda family go to the dead land of the black soil wilderness and wait for death here. How desperate would that feeling be? After a long while, Merlin took a deep breath, turned to look at Zhao Hai and said, "Fortunately, young master, you woke up, and you also have that magical ability to improve the land. This also gave us hope. Young master, the revitalization of the Buda family will depend on you in the future." Green had also said something similar to Zhao Hai. Zhao Hai understood that this was Merlin and Green's expectation of him, but the more this was the case, the more Zhao Hai felt that this matter was difficult to handle. People with abilities like Green and Merlin had not been able to do it. If he wanted to do it, it would be difficult. If he wanted to revitalize the Buda family, he would have to face the suppression of all the old nobles in the Aksu Empire, including the royal family. But at this time, he couldn't say these words, he could only nod vigorously and say, "Don't worry, Grandma Merlin, I will work hard." Merlin nodded, looked at Zhao Hai's appearance, and said with a smile, "God doesn't want my beautiful family to perish, and he actually gave you this magical ability, young master. This means that God wants our beautiful family to prosper again." Zhao Hai smiled slightly and said, "Grandma Merlin, I'll take you to a place." After saying that, he moved his mind and the two appeared in the space farm. Merlin and Green were people that Zhao Hai could completely trust. The reason why he hadn't taken Merlin and the others to the farm before was because there were many things in the farm that he couldn't explain to Merlin and the others. Zhao Hai was also afraid that Merlin and the others would discover that he had taken over Adam's body. If that was the case, he was afraid that Merlin and Green would kill him at the first opportunity. But now he wasn't afraid. He knew that Merlin and Green didn't suspect him at all and had already regarded him as the hope of the Buddha family. After all, he was now the only heir of the Buddha family. Even if Green and the others found out that he was a transmigrator, they might not move him, because if the two killed him, it would be equivalent to letting the Buddha family perish from now on. If a noble family didn't have an heir, then the title of this noble family would be taken back by the empire. Merlin was also stunned when she entered the space. When she saw the radishes that had just sprouted on the ground and the corn that was about to mature, her head really couldn't turn around. Zhao Hai said at this time, "Grandma Merlin, this is the special ability I got, a piece of land. On this land, I can grow food and vegetables. The maturity time of food and vegetables is much shorter than outside, so I can produce 40,000 kilograms of devil radishes in such a short time." Merlin looked at the land, turned to Zhao Hai and said, "Young master, where did you put those devil radishes? I didn't see them?" Zhao Hai pointed to the warehouse and said, "They are all in that inside. That room is like a space equipment, it can hold a lot of things. Not only have the devil radishes been put in, but also the supplies I collected are also stored there. As long as I want to use them, I can take them out at any time." Merlin's eyes lit up and nodded. To be honest, the ability of this warehouse alone surprised her. Zhao Hai continued, "The land in this space can be used to improve the black soil outside, and so can the water. Before, when I improved the black soil, I used a mixture of the land and water in this space." Then he walked to the cornfield and said, "This is a new type of plant that I planted. I call it corn. If all the corn in this field matures, the seeds produced will be enough for us to plant 1,000 mu of land with a surplus. However, I don't know if the corn produced in this space can be used as seeds. This still needs to be tested. The corn stalks can be used to burn fire. It is currently the most suitable plant for us to grow." Merlin looked at the cornfield with shining eyes. Of course, she understood what Zhao Hai meant by saying this. As long as this corn matured and could be planted, they could solve the food problem for these people, and they would also have firewood. Zhao Hai nodded lightly to Merlin and said, "As long as we find a suitable location, we will first improve 1,000 mu of land and then plant corn. When the corn matures, we don't have to worry about food or firewood. When we have food, we can sell the devil radishes and then we will have money. Little by little, our Buddha family can develop and grow." Merlin nodded vigorously, turned to Zhao Hai and said, "Young master, you must not tell anyone about this matter. How many people know about this matter now?" Zhao Hai shook his head and said, "Only you, Mu too, and she too have been to this space. Grandpa Green and Meg have not been here." Merlin nodded and said, "Young master, you can completely trust us, but not the others. Young master, don't mention this matter to anyone in the future. If others know about this matter, young master, you will be in danger." Zhao Hai nodded and said, "Grandma Merlin, don't worry, I won't tell anyone about this matter. Let's go out. If Mu Tu comes back and can't find us, he will be anxious." After saying that, he moved his mind and the two appeared at the foot of the mountain again. Chapter 24, A Good Place. After coming out of the space, Merlin's expression was very excited. "It's no wonder." Seeing Yu Sai interrupted Zhao Hai's thoughts. Zhao Hai turned his head to look, and it was Merlin. Merlin was also looking at the colorful mist, and sighed softly, saying, "What a beautiful scenery. Who would have thought that such a beautiful scenery is the most deadly thing on the continent? This colorful poisonous mist is the biggest barrier of this corpse swamp. Since records began, no more than 10 people have entered this colorful poisonous mist and survived, and those who came out were all top experts on the continent. Even such people can't live for more than 5 years after coming out of the colorful poisonous mist, no matter how powerful a priest or pharmacist is." Zhao Hai felt a chill down his back. When he looked at the mist, he felt that the colorful light of the mist was so eerie, as if countless ghosts were grinning at him. Zhao Hai didn't dare to look any further, and said to Mutu, who was waiting for them in front, "Let's go." Mutu responded and walked forward. They are now walking from the top of the mountain to the back of the Iron Mountain. It is strange to say that on the front of the Iron Mountain the grass grows one by one in a malnourished manner, but the grass on the back of the mountain grows very well, green and black, full of vitality, but it doesn't grow all over the mountain like the front, but in small piles, and nothing grows in other places, like a leper's head with a few tufts of hair. Merlin followed Zhao Hai and said to Zhao Hai and Mutu, "Young master, Mutu, be careful, don't touch the grass. The grass may be poisonous. Mutu is strong and healthy, so it may not be a problem, but young master can't touch these things because he drank the void water." Zhao Hai was stunned. Although he felt that Merlin was making a fuss, he didn't dare to take it lightly. The corpse swamp is notorious, so it's better to be careful. Carefully bypassing the grass, following Mutu for about 500 meters, they saw a small cave. This cave was not very big, it could only accommodate 3 people in the front row, and it was only about 2 meters high. The cave looked dark, and there was a sound of water. Merlin walked in front of Zhao Hai. A ball of light appeared in his hand, illuminating the road in front of Zhao Hai, and then led Zhao Hai into the cave together. It can be seen that this cave was also a mine tunnel built by the dwarves, and it was built very neatly, with stones stacked up one by one, very flat. After walking into the cave for about 5 minutes, they came to an open space. This space was obviously just a temporary resting place for the dwarves, or a place to store things. There were no caves for people to live in, just an open space of more than 300 square meters, and the water block was coming from Zhao Hai's right hand. Mutu turned his head and said to Zhao Hai, "Young master, there is a mountain lake over there. I don't know if it is next to the mountain lake behind our castle. If you go to the left, you can enter that valley." Zhao Hai nodded. He didn't look at the mountain lake. According to his estimation, the lake water here is likely to be integrated with the lake water behind their castle. Now they don't have large lighting tools. Even if they look at it, they can't see anything, so it's better not to look at it. The two followed Mutu to the mine tunnel on the left. The mine tunnel on the left was very wide, enough to accommodate 10 people walking side by side, and it was 5 meters high. The ground was very dry and it was very comfortable to walk on. The 3 walked forward for about 10 minutes and suddenly there was light ahead. Merlin extinguished the lighting technique in his hand and followed Zhao Hai quickly to the place where the light was. Chapter 25, Getting Smarter. Zhao Hai and Merlin were both staring blankly at the valley. Emerging from that cave led directly into this valley. The valley wasn't very large, only about 1,000 acres. The land was covered in black soil, just like the black soil of the black soil wilderness. In the middle of the valley, there was a pool about 10 meters in diameter. The water in the pool was clear and bright. On the cliff face opposite the cave that Zhao Hai and the others had come out of, there was another cave entrance. That entrance was smaller than the one they were at. It was clear that it was also a mine shaft. Seeing these mine shafts, Zhao Hai couldn't help but admire the dwarves. They had actually hollowed out such a large mountain range and built so many mine shafts. How much engineering would that have required? It was hard to imagine how they did it. Zhao Hai looked around and nodded, saying, "Not bad at all. Mutu, you're quite something. Tell me, how did you discover this cave entrance?" Mutu chuckled and said, "Young master, when I first saw this canyon, I jumped down from the cliff into the valley. Then I discovered these 2 cave entrances. The other one was full of water and had no way out. This one has a way out. I walked from the inside out." Zhao Hai nodded. Mutu's explanation made sense. This guy had walked from inside the cave out, so no wonder he could find the cave leading to the outside. Merlin was also examining the black soil. Just as Mutu had said, this place was really suitable. Although it would take some time to improve the soil, this valley was perfect for growing things. It was hard for ordinary people to find. Merlin walked around the valley. The valley was an irregularly shaped circle. There weren't any large rocks or anything like that. Besides the black soil, there was only that pool of water. It was a good place for cultivation. Zhao Hai was also looking around, nodding as he looked. He was really satisfied with this place. Not only could it be cultivated, but also because of the pool, even irrigation would be easier. Even if the water in the pool wasn't enough, there were 2 mountain lakes in the caves on both sides, and there was plenty of water there. Mutu, seeing Zhao Hai nodding, knew that Zhao Hai was very satisfied. Mutu quickly said, "Young master, have you noticed anything else different here?" Zhao Hai was taken aback. He looked around and didn't see anything different. He shook his head and said, "There's nothing different." Mu2 smiled and said, "Young master, can't you feel it? The temperature in this canyon is higher than on the mountain, and look at the grass growing on the cliffs, it's longer than the grass outside. It's spring now, and although this kind of wild grass has grown, it's not very tall. When we came, we felt it was difficult to walk because there was a lot of dry grass on the ground. This dry grass is tough, so it trips you up. But the grass on the cliffs in this valley is new grass, and it's so long many of them have already seeded. This shows that this valley hasn't been affected by the cold wind and has maintained this temperature all along. If that's the case, then it can be cultivated here all year round. It's really a good place." Zhao Hai looked in the direction Mu2 was pointing, and he really did find a lot of wild grass growing on the cliffs. And this wild grass was really different from the ones outside. The ones outside looked very green, but when you got closer you would find that the green was new grass growing under some dead grass, and it wasn't very long. But the wild grass here was very long. Zhao Hai couldn't help but nod. He now felt strange. This canyon was on the mountain, and the soil here should be similar to that on the mountain. It shouldn't be the black soil outside. But the soil in this canyon was just like the black soil on the black soil wilderness. He didn't know what was going on. At this time, Merlin's voice suddenly came. "Well said, I didn't expect you, Mu2, to be so observant. When did you become so smart?" Merlin's words stunned Zhao Hai and Mu2. After hearing Merlin's words, Zhao Hai also felt a little strange, because in his memory, Mu2 wasn't that smart. Not only wasn't he that smart, but he was also a bit silly. He usually couldn't even speak fluently. How could he be so observant and speak so logically? Mu2 was also a little puzzled. He didn't know what was going on. Ever since he had entered Zhao Hai's strange space once, he seemed to have suddenly become enlightened. He was more observant of things and thought more comprehensively. It's just that Mu2 usually didn't have the opportunity to show it. He had been following Zhao Hai's side all along, listening to Zhao Hai and everything, so Merlin and the others hadn't noticed anything unusual about Mu2. Today, when Mu2 opened his mouth, Merlin felt Mu2's difference. Merlin had just said that casually and didn't take it to heart. Seeing that the two of them didn't say anything, she continued, "Young master, this is really a good place, and I also feel it. It really seems like Mu2 said, it probably maintains this temperature all year round, and the water elements in the air are very active. It's really a good place. As long as the land is improved, this will be the best arable land." Zhao Hai nodded and said to Merlin, "Grandma Merlin, why is the soil in this canyon also black soil? It should be the same as the soil on this mountain. If it was the same as the soil on the mountain, then we could save a lot of trouble." Merlin smiled and said, "Young master, don't be unsatisfied. It's already very good to find such a place. Young master can slowly improve it. As long as you find a place, you don't have to be afraid." Zhao Hai smiled and said, "Grandma Merlin is right. I'm a little too greedy. This is really a good place, but now there's another problem. There are almost 1,000 acres of land here. We don't have any magical beasts for cultivation now. If we want to plant, we can only rely on manpower. In that case, we'll need a lot of people, but it's so far from the castle. If people want to walk here, it will take a lot of time. In that case, all the time will be wasted on the road. It will be difficult to plant all the land here." Merlin smiled and said, "Young master, how did you forget? There's still a mountain lake in this mountain. If this mountain lake is really connected to the mountain lake behind our castle, then we can come by boat. This will save time and keep it a secret." Zhao Hai was stunned. He really hadn't thought of this. If it really was by water, it would be much faster and more hidden than walking. Zhao Hai nodded and said, "That's a good idea. Okay, then I'll improve these 10 acres of land first." After saying that, his mind moved and the space portal appeared again. The 10 acres of land in front of Zhao Hai were quickly improved. Although Merlin and Mu2 had seen Zhao Hai improve the land once before, they were still excited to see it this time. Zhao Hai's ability was definitely unique on the continent. Although it couldn't be used to kill people, it was what they needed most. After improving the 10 acres of land, Zhao Hai finally let out a breath. He turned to Merlin and said, "Grandma Merlin, let's go back. It's a pity we don't have a boat. If we had a boat, we could go back by water and see if we can go directly to the back of the castle." Merlin smiled and said, "How did young master forget? I'm a water-type magician. I can take 2 or 3 people and travel on the water without a boat. Young master doesn't have to worry. We'll go back by water in a while." Zhao Hai was stunned for a moment, then nodded. To be honest, although he had been on the Ark continent for a few days, he still hadn't gotten used to the various wonders here. He always confused this place with Earth. Things like using magic to carry people on the water might happen on Earth, but they could happen here. Zhao Hai nodded, looked at the land, turned to Merlin and smiled. Grandma Merlin, let's go back. I'm afraid Meg and Stone won't be able to handle it at home. Merlin looked at the place and found that there was really nothing to pay attention to, so she nodded and said, okay, let's go back. After saying that, the three of them turned around and walked back to the cave they had come from. The three of them entered the cave, and Merlin used a light spell to lead the way. Zhao Hai and Mu Tu followed behind her. This time, the three of them went directly to the sound of the water in the cave to see the direction. After walking for about 15 minutes, Merlin saw the mountain lake in front of her. This mountain lake was really big. Except for the two sides being blocked by the mountains, looking forward with the light, she couldn't see the end at a glance. Zhao Hai stood beside Merlin. Their current position was about 3 meters above the lake surface. Going down was a slope. This slope was built very gently. It seemed that the dwarves used it to transport ore back then. The ground was also paved with stones, but because it was close to the water, it was covered with moss and was a bit slippery. Zhao Hai looked at the water and sighed. Who would have thought that there would be such a treasure land hidden here in the black soil wilderness? As long as we can find out why there are no fish in this lake, we can raise fish here on a large scale. Merlin nodded and said, yes, this lake is so large, how many fish can be raised? In the future, this can become a major source of income for our Buda family. Zhao Hai nodded, turned to Merlin and said, Grandma Merlin, let's go back. By the way, if there really are magical beasts in the water, will we be okay walking on the water like this? Merlin smiled slightly with a confident look on her face and said, young master, don't worry, I guarantee nothing will happen. After saying that, she took the lead and walked towards the lake. Zhao Hai hurriedly followed carefully behind her. Mu Tu walked to Zhao Hai's side and supported Zhao Hai's arm. Although the ground was slippery here, Mu Tu walked as steady as Mount Tai. Chapter 26, A New Crisis. Zhao Hai and Mu Tu stood by the lake, with Merlin beside them, softly chanting a spell. Soon, a layer of water-blue transparent shield appeared around them. Then, a wave surged from the lake, and just as Zhao Hai was stunned, the wave swept all three of them into the lake. However, Zhao Hai discovered that the three of them were now standing inside a water-blue transparent sphere, and the lake water was continuously supporting this transparent sphere like a fountain, moving forward non-stop. This was the second time Zhao Hai had witnessed the magic's wonder. The first time, Merlin had only used a simple light spell and a simple water ball spell, but even that had amazed Zhao Hai, who was seeing magic for the first time. This time was even more magical than the last. They were actually skimming across the water, and with one person carrying two others, it was even more impressive than the water skimming and crossing the river with a reed techniques from Chinese martial arts. Compared to Zhao Hai, who was considered half an outsider, Mu Tu's expression was much calmer. He had long known the magic's wonder, not to mention that Merlin was an 8th level water magic grandmaster. Fighting such a magician in the water was everyone's nightmare because that was their home field. Merlin also looked relaxed. She was very confident in her abilities. On the water, she believed she was invincible. Therefore, when she said there might be water magic beasts in the water, she didn't show any worry because she believed in herself. Even if there were water magic beasts, she could easily kill them. Using magic to move on the water was very fast. It took them more than 3 hours to come, but on the way back, it only took them about half an hour to see the entrance of a cave ahead. Fortunately, this entrance was the one behind the castle, which proved that this lake could indeed be used as a natural waterway, allowing them to secretly transport people to the canyon. When Merlin removed the magic, Zhao Hai finally stood on solid ground, and he still couldn't help but jump a little. The feeling of being on solid ground was really good. When walking on the water, although it looked very dashing, Zhao Hai always had a feeling of falling down. This feeling made him very uncomfortable. When the three of them came out of the cave, they saw the slaves working outside. It wasn't noon yet, and they hadn't rested. There were many places in the cave that needed cleaning, and many slaves were doing carpentry work in the cave. This cave was to be converted into a place to raise blue-eyed rabbits, which required a lot of fences. These things had to be made of wood, because Zhao Hai and the others didn't have that many iron tools right now. This time, considering the situation at the castle, Green and the others also bought some wood, but not much. Most of the things Green and the others bought were finished products, because Green knew that even if some of the slaves knew carpentry, they wouldn't be able to make anything too complicated because good craftsmen slaves were not the same price as ordinary slaves. The appearance of the three surprised the slaves. They immediately saluted the three of them. The three of them just nodded and left the cave. Outside the cave, Meg and she too were standing there. When they saw the three of them come out, they were also taken aback. Meg quickly greeted them and said, "Young master, grandma, why did you come out of the cave?" Merlin smiled and said, "Walking from the lake in the cave, you can reach a canyon, which is the most suitable place we have chosen for farming. The young master has already improved 10 acres of land there, so we came back." Meg's eyes lit up and said, "Really? That's great. I didn't expect things to go so smoothly. Grandma, young master, go back to the castle to rest. I'll watch here." Merlin turned to Zhao Hai and said, "Young master, go back to the castle to rest. I have something to tell you." Zhao Hai was stunned, wondering what else Merlin had to say, but seeing Merlin's solemn expression, he didn't dare to neglect it and immediately nodded and said, "Okay, let's go back to the castle first. Mutu, you stay here to help Meg and she too." Mutu responded and stayed, and Zhao Hai followed Merlin towards the castle. After the two arrived in the castle's living room, Zhao Hai looked at Merlin puzzledly and said, "Grandma Merlin, what can't be said outside?" Merlin nodded and said to Zhao Hai, "Young master, when I came back today, I took the opportunity to explore the situation in the lake and didn't find any powerful water magic. There are only two explanations for this situation. One, the water magic beast is very powerful and very good at hiding its tracks, so I can't find it, but this situation is almost impossible. I am an 8th level water magic master and confident that nothing in the water can hide from my exploration. The second possibility is that there are no powerful magic beasts in the water at all, and there is another reason why there are no fish in the water." Zhao Hai was stunned, but he immediately realized the seriousness of the problem. The mountain lake was one of the important plans for the development of his future territory. If there was really no way to raise fish there, then he would lose an important source of income, and it would be a waste to leave such a large lake unused. Zhao Hai said with a serious face, "Can you find out the specific reason?" Merlin also said with a heavy face, "I have heard a rumor. I don't know if it is related to the situation in the lake. It is said that because the black soil wilderness is too close to the corpse swamp, a coalition of undead creatures and poisonous magic beasts often runs to the black soil wilderness. They will kill all living creatures in the black soil wilderness, so the black soil wilderness has become a dead place. But because no one used to come to the black soil wilderness, this news has not been confirmed. If this news is true, then the reason why there are no fish in the lake may be because of this." Zhao Hai's face changed. If it was really as Merlin said, then the trouble would be great. Among these people, except for Merlin, Green, Mutu, and Shitu, who have some combat power, the rest are slaves without combat power. If the undead creatures and poisonous magic beasts from the corpse swamp really came to attack them, then these people would be dead. Zhao Hai lowered his head and kept rubbing his forehead with his hands, which was a habit he had when thinking about things in his previous life. Merlin looked at Zhao Hai's appearance and was also very worried. If that kind of situation really happened, then all their farming would have to stop, and it would be difficult to say whether these people could survive. Zhao Hai couldn't think of any good way right now, so he had to say, "If this thing is true, then our trouble will be great. Grandma Merlin, let's discuss this matter after Grandpa Green comes back and then decide. I think, starting tomorrow, don't clean the mine first. Gather all the materials in our hands, make some simple weapons, and then train those slaves. At the same time, repair the castle. If that kind of situation really happens, we can at least rely on the castle to resist for a while. If it really doesn't work, I can only take everyone into my space and let everyone hide in the space. After the undead creatures and magic beasts retreat, we will come out." Merlin frowned and thought for a while, but she couldn't think of any good way, so she had to nod and said, "It seems that this is the only way now. We have been in the black soil wilderness for so long and haven't seen any movement from the corpse swamp. There should be no problem. I hope my worries are unnecessary." Zhao Hai shook his head and said, "Regardless of whether it is unnecessary worry, this matter must be done to prevent problems before they happen. Now the last of the Buddha family's assets are here. If they are all lost, then our Buddha family will have no hope of turning over." Merlin nodded and said, "Okay, then I will arrange it immediately, but we didn't bring many weapons this time, and most of the materials are living materials, which can't be made into weapons at all. What should we do?" Zhao Hai doesn't have any good way now. If his farm's level is high enough, he can plant some trees to use as weapons, but his current level is too low to plant trees at all. He can't ask people to fight those undead creatures with a cornstalk, right? Zhao Hai rubbed his forehead hard. His forehead had been rubbed red, but he still couldn't think of any good way. Suddenly, he noticed the stone floor, and a bold idea appeared in his mind. He looked up at Merlin and said, "Grandma Merlin, I think, tomorrow we will organize people to collect some stones. We can make some stone weapons. Although the lethality of these weapons is not great, we only need to use them to defend the city. It should be possible. What do you think?" Merlin thought for a while and nodded and said, "Okay, now we don't have that many materials in our hands. When we came out of the imperial capital, they didn't allow us to bring weapons at all. Now we can only do this. After Green comes back, let him buy a batch of weapons as soon as possible." Zhao Hai nodded helplessly. He never thought that he would one day return to the Stone Age, and they had to face it again. Zhao Hai can be considered to have understood now. It seems that the old men in the imperial capital really don't want to give them any way out, otherwise they wouldn't have let them come to a place like the Black Soil Wilderness without bringing weapons. He doesn't believe that the big men in the imperial capital haven't heard of the rumors here in the Black Soil Wilderness. Now they have to face not only the crisis of being starved to death, but also the possibility of being killed by those undead creatures and poisonous magic beasts. Chapter 27, 5,000 jin a day. While Zhao Hai was troubled by the weapon issue, a voice suddenly sounded, "The corn is ripe. Please harvest as soon as possible." Zhao Hai was taken aback, but he immediately reacted. He looked at Malin and said, "Grandma Malin, the corn I planted is ripe. I'm going to harvest it in the space. Are you coming?" Anyway, he had already taken Malin to the space before, so it wouldn't matter to bring her along now. However, Malin wasn't wood or stone, and he respected her very much. Therefore, even if he wanted to enter the space, he would first seek Malin's opinion. When Malin heard what Zhao Hai said, she also wanted to see Zhao Hai's space. She nodded and said, "Okay, young master, I also want to see the space." Zhao Hai nodded, and with a thought, the two appeared in the space. The radishes in the space, because they were only planted in the morning, had only grown small leaves, but the corn was completely ripe. The ripeness of the corn was different from what Zhao Hai had seen in the game. In the game, even if the corn was ripe, it was still green. But in the space, when the corn was ripe, its leaves were already dry. However, these corns grew very strong, with large corn cobs nearly 50 centimeters long. The corn kernels had burst through the husks, revealing a golden yellow color that was appetizing to look at. Malin had obviously never seen corn before, and she didn't know what to do. She just looked at the corn curiously, not knowing where to start. Zhao Hai happily walked to the cornfield, broke off a large corn cob, and peeled off the outer husk. The golden corn cob was covered with plump kernels. It seemed that the yield would not be low. Judging from this yield, these 2 acres of land could produce at least 5,000 cattas of corn. If they could all be used as seeds, it would be enough to plant 1,000 acres of land. Zhao Hai happily handed the corn cob to Malin and said with a smile, "Grandma Malin, look, this is corn. With simple processing, it can be used as food. Although it's not very delicious, it can fill you up. These 2 acres of corn can produce more than 5,000 cattas. If they are all used as seeds, it will be enough to plant 1,000 acres of land. We can harvest once a day in the future, so we don't have to worry about food." Malin took the corn cob, but her eyes were fixed on Zhao Hai. "Young master, are you saying that we can harvest more than 5,000 cattas of grain every day in the future?" Zhao Hai nodded with a smile. He knew what Malin was thinking. More than 5,000 cattas of grain might not be much for more than 100 people, but more than 5,000 cattas every day, this number was a bit terrifying. And the maturity time of corn in the space was about 14 hours, so Zhao Hai underestimated the amount they could harvest each day. Seeing Zhao Hai's appearance, Malin's face flushed with excitement, and she kept chanting, 5,000 cattas a day, 5,000 cattas a day." Zhao Hai smiled slightly and said, "Okay, Grandma Malin, corn is not a very delicious thing. We will plant other things in the future. Now is the transition period, so we can only plant this." Malin immediately came back to her senses and quickly said, "No, young master, don't plant anything else. Just plant this, just plant this. This is the highest yielding grain I have ever heard of. Young master, we won't plant anything else, just plant this." She was so excited that she was almost incoherent. Zhao Hai said with a smile, "Okay, we won't plant anything else, just plant this." "Grandma Malin, don't be excited, haha. There are many high-yielding grains, although they don't yield as much as corn, they are more delicious than corn. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." When Malin heard what Zhao Hai said, she nodded and said, "That's good, young master, let's start harvesting now. Does this grain need to be threshed?" Zhao Hai smiled slightly and said, "It's okay, I have the final say in this space." After he finished speaking, he said in a deep voice, "Harvest the corn and separate the corn kernels, corn stalks, and corn cobs." The corn cob was actually a refined name. In Zhao Hai's hometown, corn was called baomi, and the corn cob was the thing that the corn kernels grew on. In Zhao Hai's hometown, it was called baomi beard, which was also a good thing to burn. Zhao Hai just wanted to see if the space could accept such a complex command. If it could really accept it, then he could be sure that the space completely listened to him. Malin looked at Zhao Hai in confusion, not knowing who Zhao Hai was talking to, but what happened in the space next made her dumbfounded. She saw a basket with the word harvest written on it fly up, and then all the corn flew into the basket. In a short while, the corn from both pieces of land was harvested. Before Malin could react, Zhao Hai quickly walked to the door of the warehouse, groped the warehouse with his hand, and then his expression relaxed, and he breathed a sigh of relief and laughed loudly. Malin followed Zhao Hai and quickly said, "Young master, what are you laughing at? What's going on?" While speaking, she pointed to the open space. Zhao Hai said with a smile, "It's okay, Grandma Malin. Didn't I tell you that I have the final say in this space, so I don't have to worry about planting or harvesting?" Malin said excitedly, "That's great, young master, then let's plant this land now?" Zhao Hai nodded, but he was still very careful. With a thought, a handful of corn kernels appeared in his hand, which was exactly the corn that had just been stored in the warehouse. As soon as Zhao Hai took out the corn, the space prompt sounded again, "Variety, corn, quality, excellent, can be used as seeds, can be taken out of the space." Zhao Hai looked happy, breathed a sigh of relief, and said in a deep voice, "So corn." As soon as he finished speaking, the small iron shovel flew to the cornfield and began to turn the soil. Then, seeds seemed to appear out of thin air and fell to the ground, and the bucket also began to sprinkle water on the ground. Malin watched in amazement. She really didn't expect Zhao Hai's space to be so magical. She had never seen or even heard of such magical abilities. In a short while, the 2 acres of land were replanted. Zhao Hai nodded and walked to the radish field to look at the radishes. He wasn't worried about the radishes growing worms. Although the space could refresh worms when he played the game before, he believed that if worms really grew, the space would remind him. Malin stood by Zhao Hai's side all the time. She was really too happy today. With this magical space, it would be very easy for the Buddha family to become prosperous. Seeing that there was no problem with the radishes, Zhao Hai stood up, turned to Malin and smiled, "Grandma Malin, let's go out." Malin nodded, and with a thought, the two appeared in the living room of the castle. Zhao Hai looked outside. The time they spent in the space was not long and there was no change above. Zhao Hai nodded and turned to Malin and said, "Grandma Malin, let's go and take out the corn stalks and corn cobs. With these things, we don't have to worry about firewood." Malin quickly nodded and said, "Okay, young master, come with me, let's put these things in the kitchen." Zhao Hai shook his head and said, "No, Grandma Malin, these things still need to be dried well in the sun, otherwise there will still be some moisture. After they are completely dried, we will put them in the warehouse." Malin nodded and said, "Okay, then let's put them outside the castle. There is not so much empty space inside the castle." Zhao Hai nodded and followed Malin outside the castle to the land they had improved yesterday. This land could not be planted now, so Zhao Hai prepared to put the corn stalks and corn cobs here. One was to prevent the improved land from being blown away by the wind, and the other was to block the different color of this land from the surrounding land. Looking at the corn stalks and corn cobs appearing on the open space, Zhao Hai turned to Malin and said, "Grandma Malin, you can burn this for cooking in the future. Although it is not as resistant to burning as wood, it can be used. If those slaves are cold at night, they can also burn these things to keep warm." Malin looked at these 2 large piles of firewood, her face full of smiles. Now she finally didn't have to worry about firewood. She kept nodding her head and said, "Okay, young master, I'll take care of this." Zhao Hai nodded and looked at the sky and said, "Grandma Malin, it's getting late. Meg and the others may be back for lunch in a while. After lunch, arrange for people to collect stones. It's a pity that we don't have a blacksmith, otherwise, we could use those iron tools to modify some weapons." There were already few craftsmen among the slaves and there were even fewer blacksmiths. Those slave owners were afraid that the slaves would learn blacksmithing and make weapons to rebel against them, so they simply didn't let them touch these things. Even if they encountered slaves who knew blacksmithing, they were originally blacksmiths and later became slaves. Malin also knew that if those farm tools were not modified, they might not be as handy as some stone weapons. Besides, they didn't have fuel and couldn't modify those iron tools. Zhao Hai led Malin back to the castle. Malin went to prepare lunch, but Zhao Hai sat alone in the hall, quietly thinking about things. Now they were facing a huge crisis again. If those magical beasts and undead creatures in the corpse swamp really rushed out, what would they use to stop them? And once these things came out, his entire breeding plan would be ruined. This was what troubled him the most. The breeding industry accounted for a large part of his future plans. It would be a pity to give it up like this, but if he didn't give it up with the threat of the corpse swamp, they couldn't raise anything. To build a breeding farm now, it seemed that they had to solve the problem of the corpse swamp first. But how to solve this problem? Over the years, many experts from the continent have come, but the corpse swamp is still one of the forbidden areas of the continent. Rely on his space? This doesn't seem to be of much use, does it? Zhao Hai was now at a loss. Chapter 28 Horse Bones. Zhao Hai was very clear that his space had no offensive capabilities, not even active defensive capabilities. Its only use, besides growing vegetables, was probably just letting him hide inside. Wanting to use the space to deal with the corpse swamp, Zhao Hai really didn't have much confidence. Don't forget, the corpse swamp is one of the 5 forbidden areas of the continent, and there are also undead creatures and venomous magic beasts. The space has no attack power, so how could he use it to deal with the corpse swamp? Time passed unconsciously, and Zhao Hai really couldn't think of any good way. In the end, he could only decide that if the magic beasts in the corpse swamp came out, they could only rely on the castle to fight them first. If it really didn't work, then he could only bring everyone into the space. The space had more than 10 acres of land, so it could definitely hold these people. Just then, Zhao Hai suddenly heard a burst of noise outside. He looked up and saw that it was almost noon, and the slaves should be back for lunch. Zhao Hai had just stood up, ready to go outside to take a look, when he saw Meg, Mu 2 Wood, and She 2 Stone quickly walking in from outside. As soon as the 3 saw Zhao Hai, they immediately greeted him and bowed to Zhao Hai, saying, "Young master." Zhao Hai nodded and said with a smile to the 3, "You go and arrange things. The corn stalks and corn cobs placed on the open space outside are all for burning. If the slaves feel cold at night, let them take those things to keep warm." Meg looked at Zhao Hai in confusion and asked, "Young master, what is that corn thing?" Zhao Hai said with a smile, "Corn is the main crop we will grow in the future. The yield per mu can reach more than 2,000 caddies. Corn stalks and corn cobs can also be used for burning. I have already discussed this matter with Grandma Merlin. We will grow corn from now on." Meg's eyes lit up, and she looked at Zhao Hai and asked, "Young master, is the yield of that corn really that high?" Zhao Hai nodded with a smile and said, "It's true." "Okay, go arrange for them to eat. Grandma Merlin is almost done cooking. After you've arranged for them, come back to eat too. I have something to say later." The 3 nodded and turned to walk towards the outer castle. At this time, Merlin also came out of the house. She also heard the movement outside, glanced at it, and didn't care. Merlin knew Meg very well, knowing that Meg could handle the affairs outside. She turned to Zhao Hai and said, "Young master, come and eat. The food is ready." Zhao Hai nodded and followed Merlin into the dining room. Merlin went to the kitchen to get the food. Zhao Hai sat blankly in the dining room. He found that he seemed to be getting lazier and lazier. When he was on Earth, he had to prepare 3 meals a day himself, and he also had to clean the room. Every housework was done by himself. Here on the Ark continent, he is a young master. If he wants to, he doesn't even have to dress himself. Naturally, he doesn't have to do housework himself. To be honest, this habit is a terrible thing. It hasn't been a few days, and Zhao Hai has already gotten used to having others serve him. While he was thinking wildly, Merlin had already come in with a plate. The food they eat now is still very simple: bread, vegetables, and some meat. And this meat is only for Zhao Hai. Mu 2 Wood and She 2 Stone don't have any. Although the food was very simple, Zhao Hai saw Merlin's concern for him in this simple food. In the entire castle, he used the best things, and he ate the best things. The entire castle revolved around him. This feeling made Zhao Hai very grateful and also felt a lot of pressure. He was not Adam Buddha, that playboy. He was a responsible man. The better Merlin and the others treated him, the more pressure he felt. These people lived with him as the center, which meant that these people depended on him for survival. Although the Buddha family was now in decline, as long as he was still alive, the Buddha family would exist, and these people would not be bullied by other nobles. Perhaps Merlin and the others were already very satisfied with this. But Zhao Hai was not satisfied. These people were living with him as the center, so he had the responsibility to make these people live better. wanting them all to live better in the current situation. The pressure on him was really great. Merlin noticed that Zhao Hai was not eating, but was staring blankly at the plate. Thinking that Zhao Hai was not satisfied with the lunch, she quickly said, "Young master, what's wrong? Is the food not to your liking?" Zhao Hai suddenly came back to his senses. He turned to Merlin and smiled slightly, sighing, "No, Grandma Merlin, the food is very good. I was just thinking, when can I let everyone in the castle eat such food? Then I will be satisfied." Merlin's eyes turned red. She looked at Zhao Hai and said with a smile, "As long as the young master's space is there, sooner or later, it will be done. I believe in the young master." Zhao Hai nodded and said, "Yes, there will be such a day sooner or later." As he was speaking, Meg and the three of them walked in from outside. Merlin immediately went to the kitchen to bring out the food prepared for the three of them. When they were almost done eating, Zhao Hai turned to Merlin and said, "Grandma Merlin, you can arrange for them to quarry stones this afternoon. Let's put this matter first. I can take care of the affairs in that valley. You just need to send me there every day and bring me back." After seeing Zhao Hai's magical performance in the space, Merlin's confidence in Zhao Hai also greatly increased. She immediately nodded and said, "Okay, I will organize them to quarry stones this afternoon. Young master, you should have a good rest this afternoon." Zhao Hai nodded. He also knew that he couldn't help much now. Because he drank the void water, his current body was not as strong as those slaves who had been working for many years. Besides, Merlin and the others would not let him quarry stones. After eating and resting for a while, Merlin immediately organized the slaves to quarry stones. They still had some tools for quarrying stones. In addition, the stones used to build the castle in the first place were good stone materials, so there was not much damage. They were quarrying stones mainly to make some stone weapons. These stone weapons are not very difficult to make. Most of them are stone spears, stone hammers, and stone axes. There is no way to make things with too much power. Although they only have more than 100 people now, and there are only 50 able-bodied male slaves who can fight, they can't prepare too few weapons. Stone weapons are very easy to break, so everyone has to prepare a few spare weapons. In addition, he had to quarry more stones and place them on the castle as rolling stones. After all, Zhao Hai and the others had not thought about fighting the undead creatures and venomous magic beasts head-on from the very beginning when they prepared their weapons. They didn't have that ability. They could only rely on the castle to defend themselves. This was only the case if there were few undead creatures coming. Otherwise, these people would not be able to defend at all. However, the problem came immediately. Although this place used to be an iron mine, it was an iron mine that had already been mined by the dwarves. Moreover, the place in the belly of the mountain where stones could actually be mined had now become a mountain lake. Therefore, Merlin and the others spent a lot of effort just opening the mining site this afternoon. In the end, Merlin and the others found a small mine cave not far from the castle that could be mined, but this small mine cave could not produce too many stones. Merlin couldn't help but sigh. This mine that had been mined by the dwarves really seemed to have been looted, so clean that it made people want to cry. After turning around for an afternoon, Merlin and the others had to return to the castle in frustration. They found that the method of quarrying stones to make weapons would not work. First, they had no experience in quarrying stones. Second, the tools in their hands were not very handy, and the work efficiency was too slow. In addition, there were not many stones here, and even if they were all mined, it would not be enough. In the end, Merlin had to tell Zhao Hai about this situation, and this plan had to be cancelled. Zhao Hai was really resting in the afternoon. His physical strength was not good now. He exercised in the morning, and he walked such a long way, so he was really tired. He fell asleep as soon as he lay down. When he woke up, Merlin and the others had already returned. When he heard Merlin say this, Zhao Hai had no choice. It seemed that he could only wait until Green returned, sold all the radishes, and then bought some weapons back from outside. During the time that Green had not returned, they could not do anything. If the undead creatures and venomous magic beasts from the corpse swamp really attacked, they could only hide in the space. Just as Zhao Hai was at a loss, Meg suddenly ran in from outside with an excited look on her face. After entering the house, she immediately said happily to Zhao Hai, "Young master, there's good news." Since Zhao Hai improved the land for the first time and Meg excitedly hugged him, Meg had changed imperceptibly. Now, when she sees Zhao Hai, she no longer lowers her head. She is more natural and more lively than before. Zhao Hai and Merlin were both stunned. Merlin immediately said, "What's the matter?" Meg immediately said with a smile, "Grandma, just now a slave came to me. He said that he can weave grass. He can weave the grass on the mountain into various things, such as mats, curtains, and straw sandals. Zhao Hai was stunned, and then his eyes lit up. He thought this was an opportunity. Originally, in the regulations he had set for lifting the status of those human slaves, it was stated that as long as they had a skill and performed well, they could be released from their slave status. However, in the past few days, none of those slaves had taken the initiative to state that they had a skill. Although they worked very hard, Zhao Hai was still very disappointed. Zhao Hai also knew that those slaves could not turn the corner for a while. They were afraid, so they dared not show themselves. To change this situation, a very long process was needed, and someone had to take the lead. Those slaves had been oppressed for too long, and their thinking had become rigid. It would take a long time for them to accept this new regulation. Zhao Hai had already prepared himself mentally, but he did not expect that those slaves would give him a surprise today. Someone actually took the initiative to stand up. Although what he said was just an inconspicuous skill, this start was too good. When Zhao Hai set that regulation, he had the intention of buying a horse's bones with 1,000 pieces of gold. Now, the horse's bones have appeared. Chapter 29 Reward. Zhao Hai stood up happily and said, "Quick, take me to see this person, quick." After saying that, he grabbed Meg's hand and walked straight out of the house. Meg was stunned for a moment, then glanced at the hand Zhao Hai was holding, a hint of joy flashing in her eyes, which was then replaced by shyness. However, Zhao Hai was not in the mood to pay attention to this. Marion and the others didn't notice it either, and they all followed Zhao Hai out towards the outer fort. As soon as they appeared in the outer fort, they found a slave standing there, but this slave was a bit of a surprise to Zhao Hai, because it turned out to be a female slave. Zhao Hai had thought that the first one to stand out this time would be a male slave, but he didn't expect it to be a female one. Zhao Hai stood there blankly, looking at the female slave standing at the small city gate connecting the inner and outer forts. This female slave looks to be about 20 years old. Perhaps due to malnutrition, she appeared somewhat thin, and her figure was also very petite. She had brown hair that looked a bit frizzy. She was wearing a coarse cloth dress, her skin was dark and rough, and she looked quite ordinary. She stood there very nervously, her whole body seemed to be trembling. As soon as she saw Zhao Hai and the others coming out, she immediately knelt on the ground, not daring to move. Meg immediately said to Zhao Hai, "Young master, it's her. Her name is Du, she's 20 years old this year. She just came to me and said she knows how to weave grass." Zhao Hai nodded. He knew that in this world, slaves don't have surnames. Their names usually only have one character. If they took a name with 2 characters, that would be a transgression and would be punishable by death. Zhao Hai looked at the girl named Du and said in a deep voice, "Raise your head." Du tremblingly raised her head, but still didn't dare to look at Zhao Hai, kneeling there stiffly. Zhao Hai nodded and said, "You're called Du?" Du kowtowed again and said, "Yes, master." Zhao Hai nodded and said, "You're very good at weaving grass? Where did you learn it from?" Du said, reporting to master, "I became a slave the year before last. Before that, I was a commoner. When I was at home, I often used grass to weave things, and I slowly learned it." Zhao Hai nodded. He discovered that this girl named Du, although she looked timid, spoke very logically. It seemed that this had a lot to do with her being a commoner before. Zhao Hai nodded and said, "Go get some grass and weave something for me to see now." Du immediately responded and retreated, returning with a large bundle of dry grass. It seemed she was prepared, as the dry grass had been soaked in clean water beforehand, making it more pliable. Du bowed to Zhao Hai and said, "Please forgive my impudence, master." Zhao Hai nodded, and Du immediately sat on the ground and began to weave. It was clear that she was weaving a mat, and she was very fast. In a short while, a small mat was woven. The surface of the mat was very smooth, and it was also very soft and beautiful. Zhao Hai nodded, glanced at Du who had knelt on the ground again, and said in a deep voice, "All right, Du, you have made a great contribution to the Buddha family. From today onwards, you are no longer a slave, but a commoner of the Buddha family's black soil territory. In the future, you don't have to kneel when you see me, just salute. In addition, you will receive a separate room to work for the Buddha family, and you will receive 1 silver coin per month as wages. Furthermore, I bestow upon you the surname Buddha. From today onwards, your name is Du Buddha. Du is not a very suitable name for a girl, so you will be called Ju Buddha." Everyone in the courtyard heard Zhao Hai's words. They never expected that Du could become a commoner just by knowing how to weave grass, and with wages too. Most importantly, Zhao Hai actually bestowed a surname upon her, which was an incredible thing. You must know that many commoners on the continent don't even have surnames? No, she should be called Zhu Buda now, knelt there excitedly, her whole body trembling. She really didn't expect that she would actually become a commoner, no longer a slave. It all felt like a dream. The reason Zhu Buda had the courage to be the first to stand up and say that she had a skill was entirely based on the idea of taking a gamble. Her family was not originally slaves. 2 years ago, her family was still commoners. They had their own piece of land, although it was only 5 acres, it was barely enough to support the family. In addition, her father knew some stonemasonry skills, so the family was able to live a decent life. But the year before last, there was a plague of insects in their area. The insects ate all the grain from the 5 acres of land, and not a single grain was harvested. There were many others who shared the same fate. Then, because of the large-scale crop failure in their area, the price of grain rose and her family was about to starve. Her father had to work day and night to feed the family, but he was injured in an accident and could no longer work. In order to treat her father, the family had to sell their land and house, but the money was still not enough. They had no choice but to borrow usurious loans from a noble. In the end, her father still couldn't make it and died. Her family had no way to repay the money, so the noble took her mother, her, and her younger brother as slaves. However, her mother died soon after due to excessive grief. Before she died, her mother's only wish was for their family to regain their status as commoners. But it was extremely difficult for a slave to regain their status as a commoner. Zhu Buda also saw many slaves like them who, in order to regain their status as commoners, offered their daughters to nobles, but still failed to obtain commoner status. Instead, the girl was tortured to death not long after. After seeing these things, Zhu became more careful, trying not to be noticed, while taking care of her younger brother. The 2 siblings depended on each other for survival. Later, their original master sold them to slave traders, and they were eventually bought by Green and brought to the Black Soil Wilderness. When she first heard Zhao Hai say that as long as they could make contributions to the Buda family they could regain their status as commoners, Zhu's heart was moved. But she didn't stand up immediately, because she was afraid that her skills would not be appreciated by Zhao Hai. After all, she only knew how to weave grass. After observing for the past few days, she discovered that Zhao Hai and the nobles were different from the nobles she had met before. They were very easygoing, they could eat their fill every day, and they even prepared firewood for them to keep warm. Today, Zhu had no choice but to stand up, because her younger brother was sick. Although it wasn't a serious illness, it would be very dangerous if it continued like this. Zhu was scared, her younger brother was the hope of their family, she had to save him no matter what, so she stood up. After being stunned for a while, Zhu kowtowed again, and said, "Master, I don't dare to accept your reward, I only hope that you can save my younger brother, he is sick now." Zhao Hai was stunned and said, "Oh, is that so? So you have a younger brother here too? Don't worry, I won't take back the reward I gave you. Since you have a younger brother here, then let your younger brother regain his status as a commoner with you, and also bestow upon him the surname Buda. By the way, what's his name? Where is he? What's wrong with him?" Zhu was stunned. She didn't expect Zhao Hai to do this, to actually restore her younger brother to the status of a commoner as well. Her mother's wish was actually fulfilled just like that. Zhu was so excited that tears streamed down her face and she sobbed, "Young master, my younger brother is called and he is in the house now." Zhao Hai nodded and said, "Get up, you are already a commoner now, you don't need to kneel anymore. Take me to see your younger brother." Zhu obediently stood up. She had only been a slave for a few years and had not been completely enslaved. In addition, she was very smart, so she had been performing so well and she had regained her composure so quickly. Under the gaze of the slaves, Zhu led Zhao Hai and the others to a stone house. This stone house was not very big, only about 20 square meters. It could accommodate 4 people. These people lived on the ground, simply laying dry grass on the ground. Now, a person was lying on the dry grass. This person looked 17 or 18 years old, his body was quite strong, and he looked very ordinary. He was wearing a coarse cloth dress, and the Buda family's emblem was branded on his forehead. However, he didn't look too good now, his face was covered with cyan, and his eyes were closed. Zhao Hai glanced at and turned his head and said to Marine, "Grandma Marine, what's wrong with him? Why is his face cyan?" Marine glanced at and said, "Young master, he is poisoned. It is very likely that it is the poison from the poisonous grass we saw yesterday. He may have accidentally touched the poisonous grass when he went out to work today. Because he was strong, he didn't feel much at the time, but the poison slowly took effect after he came back, so he is like this." Zhao Hai really didn't expect the poison of that poisonous grass to be so strong. He quickly said, "Can it be cured?" Marion smiled and said, "Young master, don't worry, it can be cured." After saying that, she whispered a few spells, and a ball of water blue light appeared in her hand. Then, Marion slowly placed the blue light on En's body, and the blue light immediately submerged into En's body. En's body seemed to slowly emit blue light, and then a stream of cyan was forced out of En's body by the blue light. When the entire blue light occupied En's body, his complexion slowly returned to normal, and then the blue light disappeared. Zhao Hai really didn't expect that magic could be used to detoxify. It seemed that he had always underestimated the magical abilities of this world. This world has been developing magical civilization, and now it has almost developed magical civilization to its limit. It is not surprising that it can do so many magical things. Marion looked at En's face again and said, "Young master, it's all right, his poison has been cured. He will sleep, and he will return to normal tomorrow morning." Zhao Hai nodded, turned his head and said to Marion, "Grandma Marion, arrange a room for Ju and En in the inner fort. Prepare some furniture for them tomorrow. They are now commoners of our Buddha family, and they cannot be treated the same as those slaves. Mutu, carry into the inner fort later." Chapter 30. No money again. In the evening, Zhao Hai specifically asked Kiku Buddha to have dinner with them. Zhao Hai wanted to use this method to make Kiku Buddha a role model for those slaves, so that those slaves could be revitalized and try their best to change their current living conditions. Only in this way could those slaves be more creative. Kiku Buddha was very nervous. Although she was now a commoner, she also knew that commoners were not qualified to dine with nobles. However, Zhao Hai called her to the main castle's restaurant, which made her even more nervous. But when Merlin brought the dinner, Kiku Buddha was stunned. Kiku Buddha was just a commoner before, and had never seen what nobles' meals were like, but she had heard that nobles had to eat many courses for a meal, what to eat first, what to eat next, and the first course was very particular. The tableware they used was made of gold and silver, so when Zhao Hai called her to dinner, she thought she would see that kind of situation. But when she saw the dinner Merlin brought up, she really couldn't believe that this was Zhao Hai's dinner. Ordinary bread, soup, vegetables, and meat. And only Zhao Hai had meat, no one else. Such a dinner was not much better than what the slaves outside ate. Zhao Hai also noticed Kiku's appearance. Since Kiku entered the restaurant, she had been standing there nervously, and she didn't dare to sit down even when asked. Now looking at Kiku's appearance, Zhao Hai couldn't help but smile slightly and said, "Kiku, come and sit down. I have already given you the Buddha surname. According to the rules, you are also considered a member of the Buddha family. Don't be so nervous, sit down." While speaking, Zhao Hai winked at Meg. Meg immediately understood Zhao Hai's meaning. She walked to Kiku's side and said to Kiku with a smile, "Sister Kiku, sit down. The young master is very easygoing. We now eat at the same table with the young master every day. The rules of other nobles don't work here with the young master. You don't need to worry." Kiku knew Meg's identity and knew that Meg and the others were servants of the Buddha family before. If such people were in other places, their status would be very high, at least much higher than those of them commoners. However, the contact in the past few days also made Kiku know that Meg was a good person. Although she had been watching them slaves work, there was no scolding or beating at all, just telling everyone what to do. In addition, Meg was a girl, so Kiku's nervous emotion slowly eased. Soon Merlin brought up all the dinner. Merlin looked at Kiku, who was still a little nervous, and smiled kindly. "Girl, you don't need to be nervous. From now on, you will be a member of the Buddha family. Don't worry, the young master is very good. By the way, you said you were a commoner before? How did you become a slave later?" Perhaps Merlin's kind appearance made Kiku let go of the last trace of nervousness. She finally whispered the process of how she became a slave. Zhao Hai and the others didn't say anything, listening quietly, until Kiku finished speaking. Zhao Hai sighed and said, "It's a miracle that the world hasn't been in great chaos with such nobles. Okay, Grandma Merlin, let's eat. Kiku, from now on you are a servant of the Buddha family with commoner status. You will get wages every month. Tomorrow you will follow Meg and learn something from Meg." Although Zhao Hai was very excited about Kiku's weaving skills, he also knew that Kiku's skills were not of great help to them now. Zhao Hai gave Kiku so many rewards today. Rather than valuing Kiku's skills, it was better to say that he valued Kiku's courage. No matter why Kiku stood up, her courage to stand up was worth Zhao Hai's reward. What's more, with Kiku's example, I believe those slaves will work harder. When eating, Kiku kept peeking at Zhao Hai and the others, but she found that Zhao Hai and the others didn't seem to have any abnormal behavior, and they ate very naturally, not like she imagined that they would have difficulty swallowing. After dinner, Zhao Hai and the others went to the living room. After Zhao Hai sat down, he said to Kiku, "Kiku, I will ask Mu2 and Shi2 to send you a bed and some bedding later. Take good care of your younger brother today. Tomorrow morning, follow Meg. Do whatever Meg tells you to do. If there is really nothing to do, weave more straw curtains and send them to those people in the outer castle. The weather is still a bit cold, so let them hang the straw curtains on the windows to block the cold wind." Kiku immediately said, "Yes, master." Zhao Hai smiled slightly and said, "Kiku, you are now a servant of the Buddha family, no longer a slave. You don't need to call me master. Just call me young master like Meg and the others. Mu2, Shi2, go and send bedding to Kiku and In's room. Kiku, go back and take care of your younger brother." The three responded and turned to leave. Meg and Merlin stood beside Zhao Hai all the time. Zhao Hai sighed and said, "I hope Kiku's matter can stimulate those slaves. Now our Buddha family is really poor. If these slaves can make something, maybe we can find 2 talents from them." Merlin also nodded. She also knew the difficulties of the Buddha family now. Although they bought a lot of supplies when they came to the Black Soil Wilderness this time, those supplies were mainly food and clothing or some tools. They didn't buy things that took up too much space, otherwise they would have given each of those slaves a bed. Now although they don't have the pressure of food, they are always worried about the matter of the corrosive swamp. The pressure is greater than before. In fact, Merlin is very confident in her and Meg's skills. She believes that they can deal with even ordinary magical beasts. Don't forget that she is an 8th level magician, and Meg is also a 6th level magician. Mu2 and Shi2 are even 6th level warriors, and none of them are bad. The reason why Merlin didn't dare to let Zhao Hai rest assured completely is because she also had no confidence in her heart. What is the corrosive swamp? That is one of the 5 forbidden areas on the continent. Even a 9th level great magician can't retreat completely after entering, let alone her 8th level magician. Although they don't need to enter the corrosive swamp, if the magical beasts that come to attack them are too strong, she can't guarantee that she can definitely repel the magical beasts, so she didn't dare to let Zhao Hai rest assured. At this moment, Zhao Hai suddenly stood up, turned his head and said to Merlin, "Grandma Merlin, I'm going to the space for a while. The demon radish is ripe, I have to harvest it. Do you want to come?" Merlin shook her head and said, "Young master, I won't go. I have to go to the kitchen to clean up. Let Meg accompany you." Zhao Hai nodded, turned his head and said to Meg, "Meg, go to a place with me later. That place is the biggest secret of our Buddha family now. Except for you, me, Grandma Merlin, Mu2 and Shi2, no one else knows, not even Grandpa Green knows now, so you must not mention it to others." When Meg saw that Zhao Hai said it so solemnly, she didn't know what to do. She couldn't help but turn her head and looked at Merlin. Merlin nodded and said, "Meg, listen to the young master." Meg nodded immediately and said, "Yes, young master, don't worry, I will definitely not say it." Zhao Hai nodded, and with a thought, the two arrived in the space. Meg's reaction when she first arrived in the space was similar to Merlin's. The radishes in the space were already ripe, and the corn had also grown small seedlings. Zhao Hai also explained the function of the space to Meg, and then harvested the radishes, still separating the radishes and radish leaves like last time. Looking at this magical space, Meg also understood why her mother and Zhao Hai said that this was the biggest secret of the Buddha family. This is not only the biggest secret of the Buddha family, but also the hope for the revival of the Buddha family. No wonder the two value it so much. After Zhao Hai harvested the radishes, he bought another bag of radish seeds in the store. Now he has nearly 6,000 katas of corn and 3 seasons of radishes in his space, but he only has 50 gold coins left in his hand. Although he still has a few bags of other seeds, now is not the time to plant those things, so those seeds can only be put away. After doing this, Zhao Hai turned his head and said to Meg, "Meg, this is the magical space I got. Everything here listens to me. This is also the hope of our Buddha family. You must not tell others." Meg said solemnly, "Young master, don't worry, I know what's important and won't say it." Zhao Hai nodded and said to Meg, "Let's go out. There's no need to worry about it here. It's getting late, so you should go to bed early." After speaking, with a thought, the two reappeared in the living room. At this time, Mu2 and Shi2 had already returned, but the two were not surprised by the sudden appearance of Zhao Hai and Meg. The two had already been to this space and knew what was going on there. When Zhao Hai saw that everyone was there, he nodded and said, "Okay, everyone go to rest. We still have things to do tomorrow. Meg, take Kiku to learn more things tomorrow. Meg responded, and Zhao Hai slowly walked towards his room. Zhao Hai still had to think carefully about what to do next. Now he only has 50 gold coins left in his hand. Should he sell the radishes and exchange them for gold coins, or should he sell the corn and exchange them for gold coins? If it really doesn't work, he can only plant corn on those 10 acres of land where the radishes were planted. Lying on the bed thinking about the things in the space, now he only has 50 gold coins in his hand, so he definitely has to sell the things in the space to exchange for money. Zhao Hai is more inclined to sell radishes. Before Green comes back, radishes are not very useful, and he has already stored the radish leaves separately, so even if he sells the radishes, he doesn't have to worry about not having anything to feed the blue-eyed rabbits in the future. And there is still a lot of corn now, and corn is more useful than radishes. It can not only be used as food, but also as feed. Zhao Hai really doesn't plan to sell the corn. Chapter 31, Millstone and Stone Mill. Thinking of this, Zhao Hai flashed and entered the space again. When he was in the space, he really didn't like others watching, but in order to appease Merlin and the others, he had to bring them all into the space to take a look. Now the Butte family still has to rely on them. This time, Zhao Hai let Merlin and Meg know about the situation in the space in order to give her more confidence. Now the crises in the Black Earth wilderness are coming one after another. If Merlin and the others lose confidence, then everything will be over. After arriving in the space, Zhao Hai immediately bought the radishes. This time, it was 3 seasons of radishes, totaling 1,500 gold coins. Adding the original 50 gold coins, he had 1,550 gold coins in his hand. If he used these gold coins to plant radishes, it would be enough to plant 10 seasons of radishes. It's not that Zhao Hai didn't want to keep the radishes for seeds, but radishes are different from corn. When they are ripe, the main thing to eat is the root. He didn't know if the space would allow them to keep the seeds. In addition, even if the radishes are kept for seeds, the number of seeds is very small, far less productive than corn, so Zhao Hai didn't use radishes for seeds. Anyway, selling radishes can also earn a lot of money. If they are sold outside, they will earn even more. As long as Green comes back, they can sell radishes. Then he can buy some books about mainland plants, so that he can decide what to plant. Now he knows too little about the plants on the mainland, and he can't develop even if he wants to. Zhao Hai also has no choice. Now that he has bought the radishes, he can still harvest a season of radishes tomorrow. Anyway, he told Green that he only has 80,000 caddies of radishes in his hand, and 1 season of radishes is enough for the time being. However, although he now has more than 1,500 gold coins in his hand, this money is not enough. Radishes can be harvested 3 times a day, which means that the gold coins in his hand are only enough for 3 days. After 3 days, he will have to sell radishes again. Zhao Hai was very helpless. His level is too low now, and he can't buy some higher level seeds even if he wants to, so he can only wait. At this rate, he doesn't know when he can upgrade the space. After coming out of the space, Zhao Hai fell asleep on the bed in a short while. He also found that he seemed to be particularly able to sleep now. He had clearly taken a nap in the afternoon, but he could still fall asleep at night. It was really incredible. Early the next morning, Zhao Hai was awakened again by the sound of ripe radishes in the space. When he arrived in the space, he saw that not only the radishes, but even the corn was about to ripen. Zhao Hai immediately harvested the radishes and bought another bag of radish seeds to plant. He looked at the corn and it would be ripe in a few minutes. Zhao Hai didn't want to go out, so he washed his face with water from the space, rinsed his mouth, and waited in the space. Looking at the corn, Zhao Hai was really greedy. He used to live in the north. Although no one regarded corn as a staple food at that time, it was very good to eat it occasionally. However, the corn at that time was all high-yield corn, not as delicious as the sticky corn of the past. In addition, most of them were grown with chemical fertilizers, and the taste was far inferior to those grown with farm manure, so Zhao Hai only ate it a few times occasionally. However, Zhao Hai went to his relative's house in the countryside and ate something good: cornmeal pancakes made with a large iron pot in the countryside. It was delicious, too delicious. The cornmeal pancakes were completely different from the cornmeal cakes bought in the city. Although the cornmeal was very coarse, the pancakes were very fragrant. The bottom of the pot was stewed with vegetables, and the lower part of the pancakes was covered with vegetable soup. One side was browned with a reddish-brown crust. A bite not only had the aroma of cornmeal, but also the burned aroma of the crust. The place covered with vegetable soup was even more fragrant. Thinking of this, Zhao Hai couldn't help but secrete too much saliva with an endless meaning. Zhao Hai came back to his senses and swallowed twice, but smiled bitterly. Although he had eaten corn grits porridge and cornmeal pancakes, he didn't know how to process them. He only knew that the processing of corn grits was relatively simple, just peeling and removing the navel. Cornmeal was more troublesome. First, the corn had to be processed into corn grits, and then ground into cornmeal. If it were on Earth, it would be very simple to process corn. Just find a grain processing plant, turn on the machine, and it would be done in a while. But it's not possible here. There are no crushers here, and there's no way to process the corn. Zhao Hai sighed. At this moment, the space prompt sounded again. The corn was ripe. Zhao Hai immediately harvested the corn and planted the 2 acres with corn again. Then he stared at the cornfield in a daze. The yield of corn is high, but the processing is a problem. I really don't know how people used to eat corn. Suddenly Zhao Hai became clever. He suddenly discovered a problem. The appearance of corn must have been longer than the appearance of crushers and flour mills. In those years without machines, did people just boil corn kernels and eat them? People at that time weren't that stupid, right? How did they process corn? Zhao Hai turned around in the space a few times and habitually touched his forehead, thinking about how people used to process rice and flour. Suddenly Zhao Hai slapped his forehead. He finally remembered 2 things. He had only seen these 2 things used on TV, but he had never used them himself, and he had never seen people in the countryside use them now, so he didn't think of them for a while. Millstone, stone mill. Yes, that's right, these 2 things. When Zhao Hai went to his relative's house in the countryside, he also saw a millstone, but it was a millstone that had been dismantled. No one in the countryside uses that thing anymore, but out of curiosity, he still asked what the millstone and millstone were used for. Only then did he know that the millstone and millstone were used to grind rice and flour in the past. The most important thing is that the main materials of these 2 things are stone and wood. Stone is easy to say. Although there are not many stones available for mining in the mountains now, it should be enough to make a millstone and a stone mill. And not much stone is used, and there is no need for 2 good materials. The small trees growing on the mountain are enough. Thinking of this, Zhao Hai couldn't stay any longer and immediately came out of the space. He looked at the sky outside, and Meg and the others should have gotten up. Zhao Hai immediately pushed the door and walked out. As soon as Zhao Hai came out, he saw Meg and Ju walking towards his room with copper wash basins. Seeing Zhao Hai coming out, Meg couldn't help but be stunned and quickly said, "Young master, why did you come out? You haven't washed up yet." Zhao Hai smiled and said, "It's okay, I got up early and have already washed up." "Ju, is your brother better? Is he up?" Ju was standing behind Meg with her head lowered. Hearing Zhao Hai say this, she quickly said, "Thank you for your concern, young master, and is already well and is waiting outside to pay his respects to you." Zhao Hai smiled and said, "Why are you being so polite? What's the point of paying respects? Let's go to the living room first. Call in here, I have something to ask him." Meg and Ju were stunned for a moment, but she didn't say anything. The 2 immediately responded and followed Zhao Hai to the living room. When they arrived in the living room, Meg put down the copper basin in her hand and stood behind Zhao Hai. Ju went outside to call in. The inner castle is divided into the main castle and the servants' quarters. The main castle is where Yi Hai and the others live, and the servants' quarters are some small houses where the servants live, behind the main castle. Now Ju and live in the servants' quarters. Although they are already civilians and have been given a surname by Zhao Hai, their status is still far behind Meg and the others. Meg and the others are confidants, while Ju and the others can only be regarded as ordinary servants. In a short while, Ju let in, and really looks good, and he is very tall, but he is a little thin, but he looks very strong. Now he doesn't have the dying look of others anymore, but he still lowers his head and doesn't dare to speak. Ju walked up to Zhao Hai and lowered her head and said, "Young master, and is here." Zhao Hai nodded, glanced at and standing not far away, and smiled and said, "Call him over, there is no need for such big rules, I have something to ask him." Ju immediately called an over. As soon as an arrived in front of Zhao Hai, he knelt down with a thud and kowtowed, and has seen the young master, "Thank you young master for saving my life." It seems that Ju had explained to him before he came, so he called Zhao Hai young master instead of master. Zhao Hai nodded and said, "There is no need to be so polite, you are already a member of the Buddha family, it is right to save you, stand up and answer." And kowtowed again, "Thank you, young master." After saying that, he stood up, but he was still half-bowed, with his head lowered, not daring to look at Zhao Hai. When Zhao Hai saw his appearance, he couldn't help but frown. He didn't like people treating him like this. This is a complete slave look, he didn't like it. Zhao Hai said in a deep voice, and raise your head, you have to remember, you are now a member of the Buddha family, a civilian. If you go out to do anything in the future, you represent the face of our Buddha family. Don't always bend over with a slave look, it will make people look down on our Buddha family. Seeing that Zhao Hai seemed to be angry, Zhu and both knelt down and kowtowed to Zhao Hai at the same time. Please punish us, young master. Zhao Hai was helpless and had to say, okay, stand up, don't kneel down at every turn. Seeing that the two had stood up, En's waist was also straightened a little, and Zhao Hai then continued, and I ask you, do you know some stonemasonry skills? En quickly said, yes, young master, my father is a stonemason and I have also learned some stonemasonry skills. Although I am not very proficient, I can still make general things. Zhao Hai nodded and said, that's good, I will draw 2 patterns later, see if you can make them. If you can make them, immediately organize people to mine a few stones and make what I want as soon as possible. An's heart couldn't help but tighten, but he still bowed and said, yes, young master. Chapter 32 Sewing. Zhao Hai went to the study upstairs. This study was also prepared by Grimm, with some books in it, but not many. There were also some account books and the like, but there was no shortage of paper and pens. To Zhao Hai's surprise, the pens here were divided into several types, some made of bird feathers, some made of animal bones, some made of metal similar to fountain pens, as well as writing brushes and charcoal pencils. It was a combination of East and West, ancient and modern, which opened Zhao Hai's eyes. However, Zhao Hai didn't dare to compliment the paper. It wasn't the white paper that Zhao Hai had imagined, but yellow, similar to the craft paper Zhao Hai had seen when he was a child. The paper was very hard and much rougher than craft paper. Seeing these, Zhao Hai was speechless for a while. In Adam's memory, there were many romantic and extravagant things, but he had no memory of pens, paper, and the like, which shows what kind of person he was before. Zhao Hai picked up the charcoal pencil and simply drew the shape of a stone mill and a grinder on the paper, and then handed it to En, and glanced at the things on the paper and immediately said, Master, I can make this thing. We usually use similar things to mill rice, although it is not exactly the same, but it is similar. Zhao Hai nodded reassuringly and said, okay, it's good if you can make it. Meg, you arrange for 40 men to learn how to make these 2 things with En. Make a few more. These are used for milling rice and flour. There are many people here, and I'm afraid it won't be enough if there are too few. Meg responded, and Zhao Hai continued, the remaining 10 men will go to the mountain to cut grass, cut down all the dry grass, and then let the women learn how to weave grass with Zhu. They must hang grass mats on all the houses in the shortest possible time. By the way, if anyone knows any skills and comes to you, you must tell me. Also tell those slaves that if they feel too cold sleeping on the ground, they can spread the cornstalks outside on the ground. We have too few supplies in hand now, and we can't let them sleep on beds, but always sleeping on the ground will make them sick. Laying a few more layers of cornstalks can also act as a bed. Meg responded. He also knew that the slaves really had nothing to do now. Zhao Hai's land had not yet been improved, and the mines had been cleaned up. There was really nothing to do at the moment. After explaining everything, Zhao Hai and the others came out of the study. As soon as they walked into the living room, they met Merlin. Breakfast was ready, and Merlin was here to call them for breakfast. At the dining table, Zhao Hai told Merlin about his arrangements. Merlin didn't object. Things for milling rice and flour really needed to be used. Zhao Hai's arrangement was the best. After eating, Meg immediately arranged the manpower according to Zhao Hai's instructions and let Stone lead and the others to find suitable stones to make the millstone and millpun. The women were all under her unified management, and everyone sat there weaving grass mats. The entire castle suddenly became busy, but Zhao Hai and Meg were not in the castle. The 2 of them went from the mountain lake to the canyon again. This time, there were only 2 of them. Anyway, there was no danger, and Merlin could be a little easier with 1 less person. The 2 walked on the waves and soon arrived at the canyon. Zhao Hai walked to the land he had improved yesterday and looked at it. There was no change, so he improved another piece of land next to that piece of land, still 10 mu. As soon as he saw Zhao Hai improving the land, Merlin turned to Zhao Haidao. Young master, why don't we let the slaves come to turn the soil here tomorrow, and plant these lands first? Zhao Hai shook his head. He still wanted to use this land to do an experiment. He would not forget the reminder when he first touched the small iron shovel. The small iron shovel could be brought outside the space for use, and it could also turn 10 mu of land outside every day. Similarly, he also wanted to know whether the seeds and water in the space were still under his control after being brought out of the space. If they were still under his control, then he could plant 10 mu of land every day himself. As soon as he saw Zhao Hai shaking his head, Merlin knew that he must still have something to do, so he didn't say anything, just looked at Zhao Hai, wondering what else he wanted to do. With a thought, Zhao Hai's small iron shovel immediately flew out of the space and kept turning the ground there. Zhao Hai immediately thought about planting seeds. Sure enough, corn seeds immediately flew out of the space and fell on the ground that had just been turned over. Zhao Hai went over to take a look with some worry and found that the seeds had been buried, and Zhao Hai was relieved. However, Zhao Hai also discovered a problem, that is, the iron shovel, the seeds, and everything in the space could not leave the range of 10 mu of land, and could only move within this range, and could not do two complicated things. Like an iron shovel, it could only turn the ground, not do anything else. The seeds could only be planted in the ground, not do anything else. Zhao Hai also wanted to try the space water, but there was no way. The space water had already been used to improve the land, and he could not use the water in the space outside today. Zhao Hai was actually still a little dissatisfied. If the water in the space could really change according to his wishes, then it might become his attack weapon, but unfortunately, the water in the space, after coming out of the space, could at most water the soil, and could not do anything else. Compared with Zhao Hai's dissatisfaction, Merlin was very shocked. She never thought that Zhao Hai could use this method to grow land. This was too magical. More than 2 hours later, 10 mu of land was planted, and the small iron shovel automatically flew back to the space, and the seeds naturally disappeared. Although it was only 10 mu of land, Zhao Hai was still very satisfied. He could only improve 10 mu a day and plant 10 mu just right. As soon as he saw that the land was planted, Zhao Hai turned to Merlin and said, "Grandma Merlin, can you use water magic to water this land?" Merlin came back to her senses, nodded, walked to the pool, and whispered the spell. This time, he chanted the spell for a longer time. After a while, a cloud of water vapor rose from the pool, and then the water vapor accumulated more and more in the air, and slowly turned into a light rain that fell down. Zhao Hai once again felt the magic of magic. This whole thing was an artificial rainfall, which was too powerful. In fact, Zhao Hai didn't know that not all magicians could do this. Only advanced magicians like Merlin could do this, and this was only an auxiliary magic, not an offensive one, and it was much simpler than offensive magic. Merlin's control over magic was unquestionable. After a while, the soil in the field became very moist, and she immediately stopped her magic. Zhao Hai looked at the 10 mu of land and felt a sense of accomplishment in his heart. He turned to Merlin and said, "Grandma Merlin, although this place cannot make plants mature as quickly as in the space, it is the foundation of our survival. I am afraid that the space will disappear one day, so I am in a hurry to improve the land." Hearing Zhao Hai say this, Merlin's face changed, and she quickly said, "May the gods bless you, I hope the young master's space will not disappear." Zhao Hai smiled slightly, turned his head and said, "Okay, Grandma Merlin, I can only improve these 10 mu of land a day, let's go back." Merlin nodded and followed Zhao Hai back to the cave. Walking on the waves, although it was very enjoyable, Zhao Hai still hoped that he could get on the boat a day earlier, but they not only did not have the materials to build a boat, but also did not have anyone who could make a boat, so he could only think about it now. As soon as the two came out of the cave, they heard a burst of shouting from a small cave not far away. Zhao Hai and Merlin looked towards the sound and found that Stone was leading and the others to carry a mine stone out of the cave. Zhao Hai quickly walked over. He first glanced at the stone. Of course, he couldn't tell whether the stone was good or bad. He just wanted to see if the stone was big enough. Not bad. The shape of this stone is not very irregular, about 1.5 meters high. The smallest diameter is about 3 meters, and the largest diameter is about 5 meters. It can be seen that the weight is not light. Stone and the others also took a lot of ropes to tie the stone up and carry it out of the cave bit by bit. Zhao Hai quickly said, "Okay, put the stone down, I'll take it back, you go and do other things." And the others looked at Zhao Hai in confusion, but Stone knew what was going on. Zhao Hai wanted to put the stone into the space and take it back. He didn't explain it to Wen and the others, and immediately said to Wen and the others, "Okay, everyone, put this stone down and continue to mine in the cave. We don't need to worry about this." Although, and the others were puzzled, they didn't dare to disobey Zhao Hai's words and immediately put the stone on the ground. Stone also asked them to untie all the ropes on the stone. As soon as he saw that there were no ropes on the stone, Zhao Hai waved his hand and put the stone into the space warehouse. And the others were dumbfounded. They had never seen such a magical ability. Although there were space equipment on this continent, those things were generally only available to some big nobles. Small nobles couldn't afford it, and slaves like An and the others had never even heard of it, let alone seen anyone use it. However, An and the others also knew the magic of magic. They thought that Zhao Hai was using magic, so they were all very excited and secretly said in their hearts, "So the master is a powerful magician." Zhao Hai ignored them and immediately followed Merlin towards the castle. On the way, he also saw several male slaves cutting dry grass on the mountain. This time, Zhao Hai didn't help them transport the grass back. The grass was very loose, so let the slaves take it back themselves. When the two returned to the castle, they found that there were many women sitting in the castle square. These women were led by Meg and Ju, and they were weaving grass mats there. Some women were carrying cornstalks from outside the castle and walking towards the houses where the slaves live. Chapter 33 Sudden Inspiration. Although they were busy, their faces were filled with smiles, the kind of smiles that showed they were full of hope for life, making people feel that they were living with vigor and looking forward to the future. Zhao Hai's face couldn't help but show a smile as well. He turned and walked to the place where the cornstalks were stored, and put the cornstalks he had collected this morning back on the ground. Zhao Hai didn't intend to hide anything from these people. These people were slaves of the Buddha family, and they had already been branded with the Buddha family's mark. They would never be able to erase it in this lifetime. Their fate was already linked to the Buddha family, so there was no need to hide anything from them. The slaves now seemed to have adapted to Zhao Hai's various magical performances, so they didn't react much when they saw Zhao Hai bringing out so many cornstalks. Zhao Hai glanced at the female slave holding the cornstalks and said, "These can be used to spread on the ground or to make a fire. But remember to be careful when making a fire and don't cause a fire. Also, these cornstalks are still a bit damp, so it's best to dry them before spreading them." The female slaves hurriedly responded, but this time they didn't rush to kneel down. It seemed that Meg had communicated well with them. In fact, Zhao Hai was wrong this time. This time, the credit really didn't belong to Meg. Although Meg was a servant, don't forget that she was also the daughter of a Buddha family's chief steward. Even when the Buddha family wasn't in decline, there weren't many people in the entire Buddha family who dared to give her a hard time. Her status was much higher than those of ordinary people, and she hadn't spent much time with those commoners, so she naturally wasn't very good at communicating with these slaves, who were even lower in status than commoners. The reason why these slaves had such a change was all due to Kiku. Although Kiku used to be a commoner, she had been a slave for several years. In addition, she now had the Buddha family's mark on her body. Although Zhao Hai had restored her status as a commoner yesterday, in the eyes of these slaves, she was still easier to get close to than Meg. The main thing was that although Kiku had regained her status as a commoner and changed rooms, she still worked and joked with them, so these slaves were more willing to accept Kiku. Slaves were the lowest group of people on the entire continent. Sometimes they were not even as good as a dog raised by their master. It was said that when a noble's dog died on the continent, they killed 100 slaves to be buried with it, which showed how low the status of slaves was. It was precisely because of this that these slaves had a strong sense of vigilance towards anyone with a slightly higher status or related to nobles. They never believed the words of anyone related to nobles. And Kiku's status was very special. She was also a slave, but now she had been restored to the status of a commoner. Moreover, Kiku had always been honest and got along well with these slaves, so these slaves were able to accept her so quickly. Women together would naturally chat, even slaves were the same. Once Kiku worked with them, those people would naturally ask Kiku about Zhao Hai. Kiku didn't hide anything from them and told them everything, which surprised the slaves. They really didn't expect Zhao Hai to be so easy to talk to. Similarly, Kiku also learned from Merlin that Zhao Hai didn't like people kneeling in front of him at every turn, so Kiku also told the slaves about it. In addition, Zhao Hai's friendly behavior these days had also reduced the slaves' vigilance a lot, so they didn't kneel down to Zhao Hai as before. Zhao Hai didn't care. To be honest, as a modern person, even if he had accepted all of Adam's memories, he would still feel uncomfortable having people kneel to him every day. But in order to prevent Merlin and Green from saying anything about him, he accepted it. Now that these slaves didn't kneel down when they saw him like before, it made him feel more at ease. Zhao Hai and Merlin went to the yard again. Meg and the others were about to come over to salute, but Zhao Hai waved his hand and didn't let them move. He walked to an open space next to the yard and released the stone he had just received into the space. Then Zhao Hai turned to look at Meg and the others weaving straw mats. Obviously, those slaves were used to this kind of work and their hands and feet were very nimble. Even those who hadn't woven before learned quickly. On the contrary, Meg was far behind those slaves. They were all sitting on the ground, with a large pile of grass next to each person. However, there was more grass piled up next to Merlin, almost blocking her whole person. Seeing Merlin's appearance, Zhao Hai couldn't help but think of a saying, borrowing arrows with straw boats. It seemed that Zhu Liang had used straw men in front and real people behind to borrow a lot of arrows back then. Wait, borrowing arrows with straw boats? Straw boats? Zhao Hai slapped his hand hard. He finally thought of what to use to make a boat, straw. He remembered that when he was on Earth, he had seen a news report that someone had made a straw boat and wanted to conquer the Pacific Ocean. Although he didn't know if that madman succeeded in the end, at least one thing was certain, straw could be used to make a boat. Zhao Hai excitedly turned around a few times on the ground. If the straw boat was really made, then the boat problem would be solved, and someone would take care of the land in the canyon. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but feel even more excited, which startled Merlin, who was standing next to him. She didn't understand why Zhao Hai suddenly became so excited after looking at her. Merlin quickly said, young master, what's wrong with you?" Zhao Hai was called back to his senses by Merlin. He turned his head and glanced at the others. Sure enough, everyone was looking at him, which made Zhao Hai feel embarrassed. He quickly said, "Grandma Merlin, call Meg and Kiku to the living room. I have something to talk to them about." After saying that, he quickly walked towards the living room of the inner fort. Although Merlin didn't know what Zhao Hai was going to do, she knew that Zhao Hai must have thought of something good again. She quickly went to call Meg and Kiku and walked towards the living room of the inner fort. Zhao Hai had already arrived in the living room and was pacing back and forth. He habitually touched his forehead. When he heard footsteps, he stopped and saw that it was indeed Merlin and the other two. When Zhao Hai saw the three of them coming in, he nodded and said, "Come and sit down, I have something to say." The three of them walked to Zhao Hai's front, but didn't dare to sit down. Zhao Hai smiled slightly and sat down first, then waved his hand and said, "Come and sit down." The three of them sat down as he said, but Kiku sat the furthest back and kept her head down. Zhao Hai glanced at the three of them and said, "I suddenly thought of a way just now. Grandma Merlin, we need a boat now. The land in the canyon always needs someone to take care of it, but we have too few supplies now and there is no way to build a boat. I just saw Merlin weaving grass and suddenly remembered, can we weave a boat out of grass?" Merlin and the others were stunned, even Kiku raised her head. It was the first time they had heard of someone building a boat out of grass. They had never heard of it before. Merlin said uncertainly, "Young master, will this work?" Zhao Hai smiled and said, "Yes, it will definitely work, but this kind of boat will use a lot of grass. We must compress the grass tightly and use more ropes to tie it tightly. I looked at the grass on the mountain, it is very tough and should not be a problem to use for shipbuilding. How about this, Meg, you and Kiku lead the people to try to make one first. Don't be afraid if you don't make it well. Anyway, there is a lot of wild grass on this mountain, we can try a few more times and we will definitely be able to make it." When Merlin saw Zhao Hai's confident look, she didn't say anything. After thinking about it, she thought it was fine. Anyway, even if the boat wasn't made, the loss would just be some grass and rope, which wasn't a big deal. Zhao Hai continued, "Meg, come to the study with me, I will draw a picture of the straw boat for you and you can make it according to this picture." After saying that, he walked upstairs and Meg followed closely behind. After arriving upstairs, Zhao Hai roughly drew a picture of the straw boat according to his memory. The boat was not very complicated, like an Arabian hook shoe, with the front of the shoe raised high and the back relatively flat. The bottom of the boat was very thick, and the middle was tightly tied with ropes. Zhao Hai had only seen the picture of this straw boat on the computer, and roughly remembered its appearance. Now he can only draw it for Meg to use as a reference. After Zhao Hai finished drawing, he gave the paper to Meg, and said, "I remember that the boat is roughly like this. You can make it according to this appearance first, and see if you can make it. It doesn't matter if you try a few more times." Meg responded and left with the drawing. When Zhao Hai saw Meg leaving, he didn't know what to do. Suddenly, he glanced at the books in the room and his eyes lit up. He carefully looked at the books. Fortunately, although Adam was a playboy, he was still a noble son, so he had learned to read since he was a child. Zhao Hai recognized all the words in the book. Strangely enough, the language spoken on this continent was Chinese, and even if the pronunciation in some places was different from Chinese, the difference was not big, but the writing was very different from Chinese characters. Fortunately, he had received Adam's memory, otherwise he would have really become illiterate. Zhao Hai looked at the books in the study. There was nothing too useful, only a few notes and a few history books, as well as a few books that were obviously military books, and then there were books about magic and fighting spirit. Zhao Hai first picked up a history book and looked at it. After looking at it, he felt dizzy. Where was this a history book? It was a mythology plus the Bible, and the sentences were obscure and difficult to understand, which made Zhao Hai very confused. After reading only 2 pages, Zhao Hai threw the history book aside and picked up a miscellaneous note. This miscellaneous note was not bad, a bit like a personal travel diary, and it also recorded a lot of information about the customs and folklore of the continent, as well as some legends, which suited Zhao Hai's taste. Zhao Hai couldn't help but read it carefully. When Merlin saw that Meg had been out for a long time, but Zhao Hai still hadn't come out of the study, she felt very puzzled. She went to the door of the study and saw that the door of the study was not closed, and Zhao Hai was sitting inside very seriously reading a book. Chapter 34 Studying Literature. Merlin could hardly believe her eyes. She knew Adam's character inside and out. Since he was little, Adam had disliked reading. He would cry and fuss whenever he saw a book. It was only under his father's compulsion that he managed to learn how to read, but that was it. There was no way to get him to read. Although Zhao Hai had been behaving well these past few days, he hadn't mentioned anything about reading. Merlin assumed that Zhao Hai had just become more sensible, but his aversion to reading hadn't changed. However, she didn't expect that Zhao Hai was a homebody on Earth who lived for books. Taking him away from books was like taking his life. He hadn't read in the past few days because he had just arrived here and was facing such a dangerous situation. Naturally, he wasn't in the mood or didn't think about reading. Zhao Hai really didn't notice Merlin's actions. All his attention was focused on the book. Although it was a miscellaneous record, it contained quite a bit of information, mostly about local customs and conditions, which was very useful to Zhao Hai. Adam used to be just a playboy and didn't know much about the customs and conditions of the continent. The continent was relatively peaceful now, led by the 5 great empires, with a total of 32 countries, large and small, plus some settlements of different races. It could truly be described as vast. Zhao Hai was located in the Aksu Empire, one of the 5 great empires. The other 4 great empires on the continent were the Rosen Empire, the Leon Empire, the Buddha Empire, and the Bibo dynasty. Zhao Hai's fief, the Black Soil Wasteland, had long been selectively forgotten by everyone on the continent, but the corpse swamp behind Iron Mountain was one of the 5 forbidden areas that everyone on the continent feared. The other 4 forbidden areas on the continent were Mount Akreya, which was the territory of magical beasts, and very few of any other race who entered could come out alive. The Arctic Icefield was a world of ice and snow with extremely low temperatures, where only a few ice-type magical beasts could survive. Fire Island was an island in the sea, 5,600 nautical miles south of the Bibo dynasty. It was a small island with a small area, but the volcanoes on the island erupted differently, and the underground fire was reborn, making it an absolute no-go zone. The last one was the Abyss of Demons. Legend has it that it was the same as the demon world, but it has never been confirmed. However, it is true that some magical beasts that are not found on the continent occasionally appear in the Abyss of Demons. The corpse swamp was famous for its poison. Whether it was the magical beasts or the undead creatures here, they were all known for their poison. Everything there was poisonous. That was why the corpse swamp had become a forbidden area. Adam's memory of these things was vague, but this miscellaneous record contained some records, although not very detailed, but it was enough for Zhao Hai. When Zhao Hai was on Earth, he was a homebody. If a homebody didn't know about transmigration novels, then he couldn't be considered a complete homebody. After reading this miscellaneous record, Zhao Hai understood that he had come to a world similar to a transmigration novel. There was magic, fighting spirit, magical beasts, elves, dragons, dwarves, and everything that was in transmigration novels. Because of this, Zhao Hai was even more determined to keep a low profile. He didn't know how powerful the top experts in this world were, but after watching Merlin use water magic to water the ground today, he roughly knew how powerful these people were. That was 10 acres of land completed with one spell. It wouldn't be too easy for someone like Merlin to deal with him. Zhao Hai slowly put down the book in his hand. With his reading habits developed over the years, he read much faster than the average person. Many of the things written in this book were not very useful, but this book also allowed Zhao Hai to understand this world better. There were experts in this world, and those experts were no less powerful than those written in the novels Zhao Hai had read before. In the past, when Zhao Hai read novels, they all said that magicians were not good at close combat, and warriors had no long-range attack ability, but this world was not like that at all. Magicians' bodies were not as strong as warriors, but they didn't need to chant long spells to use some simple magic. A great magician like Merlin could cast spells below level 3 almost instantly. No one dared to underestimate such a magician, and no warrior dared to fight him in close combat. Although warriors had fighting spirit, it couldn't be released at will. It still took time to gather the fighting spirit to the highest level. And ordinary warriors all knew how to use bows and arrows. Even if they didn't know how to use bows and arrows, they would use javelins or flying axes and other long-range attack weapons, and their strength should not be underestimated. Zhao Hai slowly stood up and let out a sigh. After seeing the things in this miscellaneous record, he felt that his decision to keep a low profile was correct. There were too many strong people in this world, far beyond his imagination, and even more so beyond his ability to provoke. Zhao Hai slowly walked to the window of the study. The window was covered with window paper. Nowadays, only some civilians on the continent have window paper. The homes of some great nobles on the continent use things like glass, but that thing has not yet been popularized and is very expensive, so Green did not buy it. Zhao Hai gently opened the window and glanced outside. This study was on the 3rd floor and had good light. From here, he could clearly see the inner and outer castle squares, and he could also see Meg and the others working there. However, there were still many women in the front yard weaving straw mats, but Zhao Hai looked around and did not find Meg's figure. It seemed that she had gone to prepare the materials for making the straw boat. Zhao Hai looked at the busy people and couldn't help but smile bitterly. These people were really too easily satisfied, and they didn't know that their lives were facing a huge crisis. At this time, Zhao Hai really hated himself a little. He didn't have the strength to protect these people. At most, he could only take these people into the space and let them escape this disaster, but hiding like this was not a long-term solution. The corpse swamp was always a thorn in his side. At this moment, there was a knock on the door, and then Merlin said outside the door, "Young master, come out for dinner. It's lunchtime." Zhao Hai was stunned for a moment. He really didn't expect time to pass so quickly. He looked out again, and sure enough, those who were weaving grass had returned to their rooms for dinner. Zhao Hai responded and opened the room, but saw Merlin standing at the door with a happy face, looking at him with a smile. Zhao Hai was stunned and said, "Grandma Merlin, what's making you so happy?" Merlin didn't say anything, just said, "It's nothing, I'm just happy, young master. Let's go downstairs for dinner." Zhao Hai nodded and followed Merlin downstairs. At this time, Meg and the others had also returned and were waiting for him downstairs. The group entered the restaurant and found that Merlin had prepared lunch. After everyone sat down, Zhao Hai turned to Wood and said, "Wood, these days I'm having Merlin make straw boats. You have to lead people to collect more grass, and you have to find some men to help. Meg and the others are still a little weak. You have to help them more." Wood responded, and Zhao Hai turned to Stone and said, "Stone, you help and the others to mine all the stones he needs as soon as possible. Mine them out and put them aside. When there is a certain amount, I will help you transport them back, so it will be more convenient." Stone also responded and turned to and said, "And you must be careful when mining stones. You should rather mine 2 fewer stones than pay attention to your own safety." And also responded, and Zhao Hai turned to Chrysanthemum and said, "Chrysanthemum, you should first organize everyone to weave straw mats. After they have all learned, you should follow Merlin to think about how to make straw boats. These straw boats should not be too big. It should be good enough to seat a dozen people. Don't be afraid of wasting them. Anyway, there is a lot of wild grass on the mountain." Chrysanthemum also responded, and Zhao Hai turned to Merlin and said, "Grandma Merlin, do you think we should build a sentry post on the top of the mountain to watch the corpse swamp and also pay attention to the surroundings of the castle? If there are really magical beasts or undead creatures that come out of the swamp, we can also prepare in advance." Merlin thought for a while and nodded. "What the young master said is right. We should build a sentry post. I will arrange it after dinner. The young master doesn't need to worry about it. It's better to read more books when you have time." Zhao Hai was stunned by Merlin's words. He really didn't expect that Merlin would tell him to read more books, but he would go to the study often in the future, so he nodded and said, "Don't worry, Grandma Merlin, I will read them, but there are too many things in our castle recently. After everything here is stable, I will go to read books." Merlin nodded, but Meg and the others were staring at Zhao Hai blankly. Merlin, Stone, and Wood grew up with Adam since they were little, so they naturally knew what kind of person Adam was. Now, when they heard Zhao Hai say that he wanted to read seriously, they really couldn't believe it. After saying these things, everyone started to eat formally. Zhao Hai ate very quickly. He finished eating in a short while. After finishing eating, he immediately walks to the study. Now he really wanted to learn more about this world. When Merlin saw Zhao Hai going to the study again, her eyes lit up with joy. Although this world respects martial arts, a learned person is still very respected. Even in the Aksu Empire, many important official positions are held by some famous scholars, because those kings have discovered that a country cannot do without literati. This is also one of the reasons why Merlin is happy. Because Zhao Hai drank the water of nothingness, it is impossible for him to learn magic and fighting spirit. Now that he has space, it is equivalent to a place to save his life. If he can't beat someone, he can run into the space to hide and no one can do anything to him. But that's not enough. He still needs the respect of others. When he can't learn magic and fighting spirit, there is only one way to be respected, and that is to study literature. Chapter 35 Attack. Although Merlin was very dissatisfied with the Aksu Empire, she still hoped that one day Zhao Hai could return to the imperial capital and become a great nobleman who could influence events there. That would represent the Buddha family truly being recognized and becoming powerful by those old aristocratic families. Merlin didn't know that Zhao Hai had no intention of returning to the imperial capital at all, nor did he ever think of gaining recognition from those old aristocratic families. In Zhao Hai's view, the recognition of those old aristocratic families had nothing to do with him. Whether they recognized him or not, he would live his life the same way. As long as he had the strength, their recognition wouldn't matter. It's no wonder that their views differed so greatly. Merlin had lived in the Ark continent since she was a child, a world where nobles were supreme. Being recognized by those old aristocratic families was the goal of emerging nobles. Only with recognition did they become true nobles, otherwise they would be called nouveau rich. Zhao Hai, on the other hand, had lived on Earth, where there was no such thing as nobility. So what if you're a noble? As long as I have money, I am the noble. As long as I have strength, you have no choice but to recognize me. Therefore, Zhao Hai didn't care about noble recognition at all. However, he would still study diligently to better understand this world. Only in this way could he develop the Buddha family as quickly as possible and have greater strength. After returning to the study, Zhao Hai didn't rush to read those miscellaneous notes. He carefully searched the study and found that there were really no enlightenment books. The simplest ones were probably just the entry-level basics of battle kai and magic. Zhao Hai picked up those things and glanced at them, finding that they were written very mysteriously. If no one guided him, learning by just reading books would probably not amount to much. In addition, he had drunk the water of nothingness and couldn't learn magic and battle kai, so he didn't pay attention to them and threw them aside after a few glances. In the end, Zhao Hai focused his attention on the miscellaneous notes. However, while flipping through the miscellaneous books, he really found something good: a book about calligraphy. This book about calligraphy introduced the uses of several kinds of pens on the desk in great detail. Zhao Hai also understood that these pens on the desk were not just for display, but each had its own use. The writing brush was used for writing and painting, generally used by those who particularly liked calligraphy. Some mages would also use writing brushes when making the large magic scrolls, because the magic arrays drawn on the scrolls were relatively large. The quill was the main pen for making magic scrolls because the strokes were thin, and it could be used to make some small and medium-sized scrolls. The pen similar to a fountain pen was usually used for writing and recording because the ink sac inside could store ink and write many words, which was very convenient. However, this kind of pen could not be used to make magic scrolls because the magic conductivity of metal was very poor. General mages would not have metal objects on their bodies, which would affect the use of magic. Of course, some special metals also had good magic conductivity, but the price of that kind of metal was very expensive, and no one would be willing to use it to make fountain pens. The charcoal pencil was dedicated to alchemy. They generally used this kind of pen to draw some drawings or to create underdrawings for some paintings. Only then did Zhao Hai understand that the pens on the desk were not just for display, but each had its own use and each use was different. In the miscellaneous notes, Zhao Hai also saw that the great nobles on the continent generally used writing brushes when signing some particularly important documents, which was a symbol of status. This was a small surprise for Zhao Hai. When Zhao Hai was on Earth, he always wanted to learn calligraphy and write with a writing brush, but unfortunately, he had no money and no teacher at that time, and in the end, this wish could only be abandoned. Unexpectedly, there was such a thing as calligraphy in this world. It seems that his wish may be realized. However, Zhao Hai now only remembered the usage of these kinds of pens. It was obviously a little unrealistic for him to learn calligraphy now. There were too many things to do in Black Soil Wasteland now. How could he have time to learn calligraphy? Zhao Hai spent the whole afternoon in the study. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a knock on the door suddenly came. Zhao Hai was stunned and said, "Who is it?" Shitu's voice came from outside. "Young master, we have mined several stones, please help us transport them back." Zhao Hai put down the book, walked to the door, opened it and said, "Let's go." After speaking, he took the lead to go outside, and Shitu quickly ran behind. While walking outside, Zhao Hai said, "Are you still mining stones in that cave?" Shitu nodded and said, "Yes, young master," and has looked at several caves and said that the stones in that cave are the easiest to mine, and the stones produced in that cave are not iron ore, which is best for making millstones and grinders. Maybe it is also because it is not iron ore, so those dwarves did not mine there. Zhao Hai nodded and said, "Be sure to pay attention to safety. Now our Buda family has only so few people, and we can't afford to lose any more. Every time we lose one person, our strength will be weakened by 1 point. I asked you to follow them because I was afraid that they would be too reckless." She too nodded. He understood Zhao Hai's meaning. Under the encouragement of Zhao Hai's lifting of slave status, the slaves were very enthusiastic about working, but they were just a little too impatient and should pay attention to it. The two walked to the outer fort while talking. Those women were still weaving straw mats, but they did not see the figures of Ju and Meg. Zhao Hai did not go there, followed Shitu out of the castle, and as they walked up the mountain, Zhao Hai noticed that there seemed to be an extra shed on the top of the mountain. Zhao Hai pointed to the shed and said to Shitu, "Is the shed on the top of the mountain the sentry post I talked about?" Shitu nodded and said, "Yes, Grandma Merlin asked us to build a small shed. There are 2 people watching there, and someone will change shifts every 2 hours or so." Zhao Hai nodded. Merlin was indeed from the Buda family. The Buda family started with military exploits, and Merlin had also followed the army on expeditions many times when she was young, so she was naturally familiar with arranging sentry posts. At this moment, a figure suddenly came running down the mountain, shouting loudly while running. Although Zhao Hai did not hear what he was shouting, his heart could not help but sink. He immediately turned his head and said to Shitu, "Shitu, go to the cave quickly, and let everyone inside return to the castle immediately, and then go find Mu Tu and the others and let them return to the castle immediately. I will go find Meg and the others." After speaking, he raised his leg, and was about to leave, but Shitu grabbed Zhao Hai and said, "Young master, I will go, you return to the castle immediately. The Buda family cannot be without you. If there is any situation, you immediately enter the space." Zhao Hai was stunned, then his face sank and said, "Don't talk nonsense, I am the head of the Buda family. How can I retreat in the face of battle at this time? You go quickly." After speaking, he stepped forward and left. However, she too quickly ran in front of him, knelt on the ground with a plop, hugged Zhao Hai's leg, and said, "Young master, please return to the castle quickly, the Buda family cannot be without you. If we lose you, then all of us will be finished, young master." Zhao Hai looked at Shitu's appearance and knew that if he did not agree, Shitu would not move. He knew Shitu's stubbornness. He still remembered the scene where the 2 brothers held swords across their necks last time. Zhao Hai had to nod and said, "Okay, then you go immediately, I will return to the castle and let everyone go to the inner fort first." Shitu responded and stood up. At this time, the figure also ran to Zhao Hai and knelt down and said, "Master, many magical beasts and undead creatures have come from the mountain and are climbing up the mountain." Zhao Hai immediately said, "Are there still people in that shed?" The man immediately said, "Yes, Ding is still on the mountain." Zhao Hai was furious and said, "Idiot, why don't you come down yet? Shitu, go to the mountain and call that guy down." Shitu responded and immediately turned around and ran. Zhao Hai turned his head and looked at the slave kneeling on the ground and said, "What is your name?" The man immediately said, responding to the master, "My name is Lin." Zhao Hai nodded and said, "You return to the castle immediately, find Grandma Merlin and see if she is in the castle. If she is not there, then go and tell those who are weaving grass that everyone should go to the inner fort. This is my order, go quickly." Lin responded, jumped up and ran towards the castle. Zhao Hai also knew his body, he could not possibly run as fast as Lin, so he asked Lin to send the message. Zhao Hai also started running towards the castle, but his body was really not good, and he was already panting after only a few steps. When Zhao Hai returned to the castle, he found that those who were weaving grass had already entered the inner fort. When he arrived at the inner fort, he saw Merlin standing there, and everyone was looking at Zhao Hai uneasily. When Merlin saw Zhao Hai returning, she immediately walked to his side and said, "Young master, what do we do now?" Zhao Hai took a few breaths and said, "Grandma Merlin, please count the number of people immediately and see how many people are in the courtyard now. I will go to the castle now, and after everyone returns, let them close the gate of the castle immediately." Merlin quickly said, "Young master, you should stay here and count the number of people. I will go to the gate of the city." After speaking, she quickly walked outside, without giving Zhao Hai a chance to object. Zhao Hai helplessly looked at Merlin's back. Merlin and the others really took care of him too much, always putting him in the safest place, but Zhao Hai also knew that he had no means of self-protection now, so he could only do this. He turned his head and looked at the people standing in the inner fort. Now standing here, except for Lin, were all women, more than 30 of them. Zhao Hai immediately said, "Everyone, line up." Hearing Zhao Hai say this, these slaves immediately lined up, the speed of which greatly exceeded Zhao Hai's expectations. Chapter 36. Overwhelming Monsters. Zhao Hai thought that these slaves had not gone to school, so it should be difficult for them to stand in line, but he did not expect that as soon as his order was given, the female slaves quickly lined up in 2 neat rows, no worse than Zhao Hai and the others when they were in school. Lin stood alone to the side. Zhao Hai glanced at Lin, knowing that this was because he was a man. He was the only male slave in the castle, so he stood there alone. The speed at which these slaves lined up greatly exceeded Zhao Hai's expectations, so he was a little overwhelmed for a moment, looking at the slaves in confusion. What Zhao Hai didn't know was that these slaves had been trained to stand in line since they were young, and now standing in line was almost an instinct for them. Those slaves certainly wouldn't count the number of slaves every day, but whether these slaves went out to work or came back, they had to stand in line, reporting the number when they left and reporting the number when they returned, using this method to prevent someone from running away. Zhao Hai didn't know this, so when he saw these people line up so quickly, he couldn't help but be stunned for a moment, but he immediately recovered. He knew that there was no time to think so much at this time, and immediately said, "Count off." He shouted this sentence almost instinctively, but the slaves immediately began to count off. The last number was 34, which meant that there were now 34 female slaves and 1 male slave in the yard. Zhao Hai nodded, and said loudly, "Just now, Lin sent a message from the mountain that a large number of magical beasts and undead creatures in the corpse marsh are coming to the castle. There may be a battle in a while. You stay here now and don't go anywhere." The female slaves couldn't help but show fear on their faces. If a human army came, they wouldn't be afraid. As long as they didn't resist, the other party would generally not kill slaves, because slaves could be sold for money, so as long as they didn't resist, they would be safe most of the time. But this time, it was magical beasts and undead creatures. For these two things, gold coins were of no use. In their eyes, they couldn't tell who was a noble and who was a slave. In their eyes, people were just people, with no distinction of status. At this time, several more slaves came in from outside, also female. Ju was with them. Zhao Hai asked them to count off again. Including Ju, there were a total of 50 people. All the female slaves had returned. As soon as Zhao Hai saw Ju leading these female slaves back, he knew that Meg might have returned as well, but she didn't enter the inner castle. She should be preparing to meet Mutu and the others in front. Zhao Hai didn't go to the outer castle. He knew that going there now would only add to Merlin and the others' troubles. It would be better to wait here. Zhao Hai glanced at the slaves, turned to Ju and said, "Ju, keep an eye on them and don't let them run around." Then he turned to the slaves and said, "I'm going into the house to get something. You must listen to Ju and don't run around." After speaking, Zhao Hai quickly walked towards the castle. There was an underground warehouse in the castle. He had been there and saw that it contained all the supplies that Green had bought. Now Zhao Hai was going there to put all those supplies into his space to prevent them from being ruined by those magical beasts or undead creatures. This underground warehouse was really big. Zhao Hai went in for a while before he collected all those things. Then he ran upstairs again. There were still a lot of things upstairs, the most important of which were the books in the study. Zhao Hai also discovered that Green and the others bought those books as if they intended to train those slaves. Otherwise, they wouldn't have bought so many books about magic and fighting spirit enlightenment. Those books were very important. They were not only a key for Zhao Hai to understand this world, but also a teaching material for the Buddha family to train talents. Zhao Hai quickly went upstairs and collected all the things in the study into the space, even the tables and chairs. Anyway, the space warehouse was not limited, so he packed as much as he could. Zhao Hai didn't pack things like bedding first. Green and the others bought a lot of those things, probably because the weather was getting warmer, so he hadn't taken them out for the slaves to use, so there was a big pile in the warehouse. Zhao Hai had just finished collecting the things in the study when he heard Merlin calling him outside. Zhao Hai quickly ran out of the house and saw that Merlin and the others had already returned. All the slaves were gathered in the inner castle, and Mu Tu and the others had also returned. When Zhao Hai saw that everyone had returned, he breathed a sigh of relief, turned to Merlin, and said, "Grandma Merlin, has everyone returned?" Merlin nodded and said, "Everyone has returned, and the castle gate is closed, but I don't think those magical beasts will come so quickly. Young master, why don't you go to the space?" Zhao Hai shook his head and said, "Not yet, Grandma Merlin, let's go to the wall of the outer castle and take a look. I haven't seen poisonous magical beasts and undead creatures yet." Merlin looked at Zhao Hai worriedly and said, "Young master, is this not good? It's too dangerous. What if something really happens?" Zhao Hai smiled and said, "It's okay, aren't you still here? I just want to see those magical beasts and undead creatures and see how many are coming this time. If there are a lot of them, we will retreat to my space. If there are not many, we will just drive them back." Merlin was stunned, but didn't say anything else. She was very confident in her abilities. Just like what Zhao Hai said, if there were not many magical beasts and undead creatures coming this time, she could really drive them back. Zhao Hai waved his hand and called Ju and over and said to them, "You guys watch them here and don't let them run around." After speaking, he walked towards the wall of the outer castle with Merlin and the others. Mu Tu and she too followed closely beside Zhao Hai, and Meg stood behind Zhao Hai, never leaving. Zhao Hai also felt very helpless about their appearance, but there was no way, so he had to let them follow. Zhao Hai was very clear that if he didn't let them follow, then he might not be able to go to the wall. Merlin and the others thought that the undead creatures and poisonous magical beasts would not be too fast, but to their surprise, when they just arrived at the wall of the castle, they found that those magical beasts and undead creatures had already run to the bottom of the mountain and were moving down. Walking in the front were a group of rat-like things. Each of these things was much bigger than a rat, about 1 meter tall, with light green long hair and mold-like things growing on their feet. Their body length exceeded 3 meters, not counting their thick, long tail. Among these rat-like things, there were several that were particularly huge, about 2 meters tall, and their fur was also colorful. It seemed that they were the heads of this group. There were more than 1,000 of these rats, more than 1,000 large rats about 1 meter long, which made the hair on Zhao Hai's body stand on end. Behind this group of things followed a large group of snakes. That's right, it was snakes, countless snakes, big and small, all kinds of strange-shaped snakes. Some of these snakes were green, some were red, and some were colorful. The largest snakes were colorful, about 1 meter thick, and looked like they were not easy to mess with. Behind these snakes followed a large pile of insects, all kinds of insects. These insects had one characteristic. They were huge. Even a spider was more than 1 meter tall, and the larger ones were about 2 meters tall. Of course, there were also some small insects, but those small insects were also very difficult to deal with. Each one moved very flexibly and seemed to be very fast, drilling back and forth in the pile of insects. These insects were also colorful, with all kinds of colors. It was obvious that they were very poisonous, which made Zhao Hai's heart sink. There were already enough snakes, and the number of these insects was even greater than the number of snakes. At this time, those magical beasts that looked like rats, which were walking in the front, had already arrived near the moat outside the castle. Those rat-like things obviously knew how to swim. They immediately ran into the moat, and the water in the moat instantly turned green. Zhao Hai's face became even more ugly. He finally understood why there were no fish in this moat. After those poisonous rats took a bath in the river, it would be strange if there were still fish in the river. Merlin walked to Zhao Hai's side and said, "Young master, go back. There are too many magical beasts. We can't deal with them." Zhao Hai nodded and looked at the mountain and found that more magical beasts were coming out of the mountain. This time, what came out were crocodile-like magical beasts, and each of them was very big, and the colors on their bodies were also very bright. And in the middle of these crocodile magical beasts, there were also some bones mixed in. That's right, in Zhao Hai's opinion, it was bones, some moving bones, some human, some beast, some big, some small, all kinds of bones, and slowly there were more and more bones on the mountain. Merlin pulled Zhao Hai at this time and said, "Young master, let's go." Zhao Hai nodded, but suddenly felt that the sky above those magical beasts seemed to be dark. Zhao Hai looked at the sky in confusion, and found that above those magical beasts, he didn't know when, there was a group of flying magical beasts flying. Some of these magical beasts were not flying very high, they were some flying insect-like magical beasts, and some were flying very high, they were some bird-shaped magical beasts. Zhao Hai's face changed, there were flying magical beasts, then it would be too simple to attack the castle. Zhao Hai immediately nodded and said, "Hurry, there are flying magical beasts, we have to go to the inner castle to collect those slaves, otherwise it will be too late." Merlin also saw it, she immediately shouted, "Mutu, quickly return to the inner castle and let those slaves into the house." Mutu responded, and a yellow light slowly flashed on his body, and his speed suddenly became much faster, and he ran towards the inner castle in a puff of smoke. And she too at this time picked up Zhao Hai in one hand and ran straight to the inner castle, but fortunately he also used fighting spirit, although the speed was very fast, but it was very stable, and did not let Zhao Hai suffer much. Merlin's body flashed with a water blue light and her speed was no slower than she too's. Meg didn't need to say more, her body flashed with a cyan light, and her speed was much faster than she too's. Chapter 30 set on entering space. Fortunately, the castle wasn't very large. Stone's speed was extremely fast. In just a few breaths, Zhao Hai and the others had entered the main castle's room. The already small room seemed very crowded because so many people had entered at once, but fortunately, there was no chaos. The slaves were also very clear that if they didn't obey now, the result waiting for them might be death, so they very honestly entered the room under Wooden's arrangement. As soon as Zhao Hai entered the room, he immediately said to Merlin and the others, "Grandma Merlin, you go into the space first. When those slaves enter the space later, arrange them a bit and tell them not to run around in the space. Wooden, Stone, guard the door. Meg, Daisy, and Anne, organize everyone to enter the space." Daisy and Anne had not entered the space, so Zhao Hai asked Meg to help as the organizer, with Daisy and Anne assisting her. He had Merlin enter the space to settle the people who had just entered, and Stone and Wooden guarded the door of the main castle's house to prevent the magical beasts from suddenly attacking. Then a hole appeared beside Zhao Hai. The slaves were no strangers to this hole, it was the hole that appeared when Zhao Hai improved the land. It wasn't that Zhao Hai didn't want to take all these people into the space at once, but he couldn't. He found that when he wanted to take the slaves, the space didn't respond, which surprised Zhao Hai. Fortunately, when he took Merlin in, the space immediately responded, and Merlin appeared in the space at once, which reassured Zhao Hai. In the end, he had to let the space create a hole-like thing here to see if it would allow the slaves to enter. The slaves were a little scared at first, not knowing where Zhao Hai wanted to take them, but when they saw that Merlin had already entered, they knew that Zhao Hai wouldn't harm them, and they immediately entered the hole slowly under Meg's organization. At this time, roars of magical beasts were already coming from the outer castle, and the castle's iron gate was being hit with loud thuds. Merlin organized even faster. Fortunately, the hole that Zhao Hai created this time was very large, enough for 4 people to walk side by side, and the slaves could stand in line to enter the space. Before long, all the slaves had entered the space, and Meg, Daisy, and Anne had also entered. Zhao Hai's mind moved, and he appeared in the space with Wooden and Stone. The slaves who had just entered the space looked around in a daze. Zhao Hai ignored them and said loudly to the slaves in the space, "Listen up, this is my space. Don't walk around here casually. Now find a place to sit down. Be careful not to step on the crops in the field." Fortunately, in addition to the farmland, there were some open spaces in this space. These open spaces could not be cultivated. Zhao Hai had tried to turn them over with a small iron shovel, but just like in the game, the land didn't react at all. Although the slaves didn't understand what this space was all about, they obediently sat down. Zhao Hai glanced at the slaves, then turned to Merlin and said, "Grandma Merlin, I'll take out some empty cups later, and you can distribute them to them. If anyone wants to drink water, let them go to the spring to drink themselves. Also, take out some blankets for them to sit on." After speaking, he walked to the warehouse. With a thought, a large pile of cups appeared in front of the warehouse. These cups were all wooden water cups, the cheap kind, which Green and the others had specially bought for the slaves. Originally, these slaves had been given such cups, but because things were urgent, they didn't bring their things in, so they could only be distributed to them again now. Merlin immediately led Meg and the others to distribute the cups. Then, Zhao Hai took out many blankets and spread them on the ground for the slaves to sit on. After doing all this, Zhao Hai took out a few straw mats. These straw mats were just woven by the slaves and were casually taken into the space by Zhao Hai. Zhao Hai took out these straw mats not for the slaves to sit on, but to build toilets. More than 100 people had entered the space. It was hard to guarantee that someone would want to relieve themselves. There were both men and women in the space now. It would be very inconvenient without something to block them. Fortunately, Green and the others had bought some boards. Although there weren't many of these wooden boards, it was enough to build 2 toilets. Wooden and Stone led a few male slaves and used straw mats to block out a space behind the thatched house and the warehouse respectively. The space behind the thatched house was used as a women's toilet, and the space behind the warehouse was used as a men's toilet. After all this was done, Zhao Hai and the others breathed a sigh of relief. Zhao Hai also immediately harvested the radishes and immediately planted another season. In order to stabilize the emotions of the slaves, Zhao Hai specially gave each of them a large radish to eat. It must be said that the taste of this white radish was really good, sweet, and slightly spicy, but the scene of more than 100 people gnawing on radishes together was quite spectacular. The slaves were very happy to eat. They learned from Merlin and the others that this was actually a magical vegetable. They had never seen it before, let alone eaten it. Everyone ate carefully, treating the radish as a peerless delicacy. Fortunately, the emotions of these slaves were still stable. Zhao Hai returned to the thatched house. During this period, he had hardly entered the thatched house. Anyway, there was nothing in it. Although there was a screen, it could only enter the store, and Zhao Hai didn't need to enter the store to buy things, so he had never entered the house. However, no matter what, there was a bed in this house. Zhao Hai wanted to have a good rest on the bed. This period of tossing had exhausted him. Although the space was very large, this small thatched house was very small, only enough for one person to sleep in. Of course, a few people could sit at the table, but it was believed that sitting there was not as comfortable as outside. Although Zhao Hai couldn't wait to have a good sleep now, he also knew that now was not the time. After he entered the thatched house, he called Merlin and the others in, leaving only Daisy and Anne to watch the slaves. Merlin and the others curiously looked at the thatched house, but they didn't see anything special after watching for a while, so they had to honestly sit on the stools. Zhao Hai stood in the house and said, "We don't know what the situation is outside now. We only hope that those magical beasts can return to the swamp sooner, but we still have to prepare for a long-term life here. In a few hours, the corn will be ripe. In addition to the food brought in from outside, eating is not a problem. After the corn is ripe, firewood will not be a problem, but if we always let those slaves do nothing, I'm afraid it won't work. Grandma Merlin, do you have any good ideas?" Merlin thought for a while and shook her head. The space is already so big, and they don't need to cultivate the land. There really is no good way. Young master, what do you think? Zhao Hai walked around the house a few times and said, "When I first came in, I took all the books in the study into the space. Grandma Merlin, why don't you teach those slaves to read? If our beautiful family wants to develop, we can't rely on just a few of us. I believe these slaves won't betray us. Letting them recognize some words may be useful in the future." When Merlin heard Zhao Hai say this, she nodded happily and said, "Okay, young master, this is a good idea. It's just that there's nothing to do in the space now. Letting them recognize some words will definitely be of great use in the future. Let's do as young master says." Zhao Hai nodded and waved his hand. The books in the study appeared in front of him, as well as some paper and pens. Zhao Hai pointed to these things and said to Merlin, "Grandma Merlin, take a look for yourself and see which book you want to teach them." Merlin carefully looked at the books and took out one from the middle and said, "Young master, let's use this one." When Zhao Hai saw it, Merlin had taken out a miscellany, and it was a relatively simple miscellany. The book was called Travels in the Aksu Empire. Zhao Hai nodded and then said, "There's no need to let them learn now. They've just come in and are still a little frightened. Let them rest for a while before learning." Merlin nodded and glanced at Zhao Hai's tired face and said, "Young master, you should also have a good rest. We'll go out." Zhao Hai also knew that this house was too small and not suitable for them to rest, so he had to nod and say, "Okay, I've taken out a few more blankets in the warehouse there. Grandma Merlin, if you want to rest outside, remember to spread more." Merlin nodded and led Meg and the others out of the thatched house, but Wooden and Stone stayed at the door of the thatched house, standing there like door gods, one on the left and one on the right. Merlin didn't care. She walked to the slaves and glanced at the slaves who were sitting there not knowing what to do, and said in a deep voice, "The place where we are now is the young master's magical space. Here, everything is up to the young master. Now the magical beasts and undead creatures outside are probably attacking the castle. Only here is safe, so you must be obedient, otherwise Zhao Hai will drive you out of the space, understand?" The slaves immediately stood up and said in unison, "Understood." This was also trained in the slave merchant. Any slave merchant, after getting some slaves, would carry out some simple training before selling them. Among them, standing in line, counting off, answering, kneeling, and kowtowing were the simplest, so these slaves had formed a conditioned reflex. Merlin nodded and said, "You have done a lot of work today, and you have been frightened. The young master said that you are tired and can have a good rest. Okay, go to rest, remember the location of the toilet, don't run around. The young master's room is not allowed to approach, and you are not allowed to touch the things in the space, understand?" The slaves responded in unison again. Chapter 38 Reading. Zhao Hai did not want to know what was happening outside the thatched house. He believed that Malin and the others would handle it well. Right now, Zhao Hai was really tired and just wanted to get a good night's sleep. He took a bedroll from the warehouse, spread it on the bed, and immediately lay down. He fell asleep within minutes. He was truly exhausted. Because his body had consumed the void water, he couldn't handle much physical activity, let alone the stressful situation today. The slaves outside the thatched house were also resting. They rarely had such an opportunity, so they naturally wouldn't complain. Moreover, they were lying on soft bedding, which was much better than dry grass. Before long, the entire space fell silent. Even Stone and Wood, who were standing guard for Zhao Hai in front of the door, sat down and dozed off. More than 2 hours later, Malin and the others woke up. Malin quietly walked to the front of the thatched house, opened the door, and glanced at Zhao Hai. Seeing that he was sleeping soundly, she quietly closed the door again. She looked at the slaves and noticed that some of them were already awake, sitting there, unsure of what to do. Although Malin could teach them to read, she didn't want to do it right now. If she taught these people to read, she would have to make noise, and she didn't want to wake Zhao Hai. However, Malin did notice that the radishes she had planted before going to bed had already sprouted. This surprised Malin greatly. It was the first time she had seen how plants grew in the space, and the speed was astonishing. Malin couldn't help but squat by the field, looking at the newly sprouted radish seedlings. The small seedlings looked very strong, and the soil was in excellent condition, clearly indicating their health. Mage did the same as Malin, squatting beside her and whispering, "Grandma, why did these devil radishes sprout so quickly? I heard people say that magic vegetables are very difficult to grow. How is it so easy here?" Malin smiled slightly and said, "Young master told me long ago that planting crops in this space would greatly shorten the ripening time. I just didn't expect it to be this short. The devil radishes you speak of are called radishes in my space. They are the lowest grade crops in the space, maturing every 8 hours. Zhao Hai's voice came slowly. Malin and Mage were stunned. They turned around and saw that Zhao Hai had already come out and was standing behind them. Malin quickly stood up and said, "Young master, is what you said true? Can these devil radishes really mature every 8 hours? Zhao Hai nodded and pointed to the corn that had already grown ears. "Do you see those corn plants? Corn is rated higher than radishes in the space. It takes 14 hours from planting to maturity." Malin and the others couldn't help but look in the direction Zhao Hai was pointing. The corn was still in its growth stage, with dark green leaves that looked very vigorous. Zhao Hai turned to Malin and said, "Now there is enough food in the space to eat. It's best if we stay in the space for a while longer before going out, so we don't encounter those magical beasts again." Malin nodded and said, "Yes, young master is right. There's no shortage of food in the space and it doesn't rain. Everyone can sleep on the ground outside, so it's fine to stay here for a few days." Zhao Hai nodded, turned around, and glanced at the slaves who had woken up and were standing up, looking at him respectfully. He sighed and said, "Grandma Malin, teach them to read in a little while. Wood and I will go build some field kitchens to cook food later." Feeding over 100 people was no easy task. Although Zhao Hai had stored all the supplies from the warehouse into the space, he needed to build large stoves to provide for everyone's food and drink. There was nothing in the space, so he could only build simple field kitchens. Malin looked at the slaves and said, "Young master, let them do it. It won't take that much time anyway. You just need to take out the materials. We can't let you do everything." Zhao Hai glanced at the slaves and had to nod. If he let the slaves learn to write there while he built the field kitchens, the slaves would probably be frightened and wouldn't learn a single word. Seeing Zhao Hai nod, Malin immediately organized people to start digging the stoves. Fortunately, Zhao Hai had loaded all the supplies from the castle's warehouse into the space warehouse, so they didn't lack tools now. To feed over 100 people, they didn't need to dig too many field kitchens, only about 10. The pots they used were all field pots with stands underneath. These pots were specially chosen by Jelen and the others. They knew they were coming here, so they prepared many of these iron pots, both for use on the way here and for the slaves to use. In fact, many slave owners used such field kitchens because they were the simplest. No matter where the slaves went to work, as long as they found 2 people to carry the pot, they could cook directly at the worksite, saving a lot of time. 10 field kitchens were quickly set up, but they couldn't be used yet. Zhao Hai had to wait until the corn matured before there would be fuel in the space. Otherwise, they would have to burn the wood they bought, which was valuable and would be a shame to burn. Now Zhao Hai and the others lacked everything, and they didn't know when Jelen would return. After he returned, they could go out and sell the radishes in their hands, exchange them for gold coins, and then buy wood and other things. The wood they had now was all they had, and Zhao Hai didn't want to waste it. Zhao Hai looked at the set-up field kitchens, nodded, and glanced at the slaves. Then he turned to Malin and said, "Grandma Malin, the corn will mature in about 2 hours. During this time, teach everyone to read some words. I'm going to rest in the house." Malin nodded, and Zhao Hai walked into the house. Malin watched Zhao Hai enter the house and then said to the slaves, "Everyone, don't worry. In about 2 hours, the corn will mature and we can eat. During these 2 hours, everyone will learn to read with me." Before she could finish speaking, the slaves started buzzing. Slaves were not allowed to read, which was common knowledge on the continent. No slave owner would teach slaves to read, so for slaves, reading was a very sacred thing. Now, upon hearing that Malin was going to teach them to read, all the slaves were very surprised. Malin said in a deep voice, "Quiet." The slaves immediately quieted down, all looking at Malin with excited expressions. Malin continued, "Our Buddha family is different from ordinary nobles. Young master is a kind person. I have just received young master's permission. If anyone learns well and recognizes many words during the learning process, young master may waive his slave status. Do you understand?" The slaves became even more excited. It was already good enough that Zhao Hai allowed her to teach them to read. Now he was even saying that as long as they learned well, they could become commoners. For the slaves, this was like a pie falling from the sky, and then someone was telling them that as long as they ate more, they would get a bonus. Where could they find such a good thing? Looking at their expressions, Malin continued, "Because the conditions are limited, I can only teach everyone some simple words. In these 2 hours, I will only teach everyone to recognize 10 words, but you must be able to read and write them." After saying that, she picked up a few pieces of white paper, took out a writing brush, wrote a word on each piece of white paper, and taught them how to pronounce and write the word. Now they didn't have a blackboard, so they could only use white paper to write words to teach these people. Because there were too many people, only one word was written on each piece of white paper, so the words were large enough for even the people sitting in the back to see. Mage had been following Malin, watching these people study so seriously, including Ju and En. Although Ju and En were commoners before and could go to school, their families didn't have the money to pay tuition, so they had never gone to school. Now that they had such an opportunity, how could they let it go? Mage had also gone to the imperial school before, but she went to a noble school. She found that these slaves were completely different from the students in the school. The noble students in the school regarded going to school as a kind of torture. They were very unmotivated when they went to school, and they were very happy when it was time to get out of class. They wished they could play at home every day. Adam used to be like that. But these slaves were completely different. When these slaves were learning to read, their expressions were very excited and very focused, afraid that they would not remember. Because they didn't have anything to write with, they drew on the ground with their fingers. Their serious attitude deeply moved Mage. Wood and Stone also watched these people. Although they weren't very smart before, they had learned to read because they were adopted by the Buddha family. However, when they learned to read, they weren't as serious as these slaves. One reason was that they were young, and the second was that they weren't smart enough. They had to learn a word several times before they could remember it. The third reason was that it came too easily. What is obtained too easily is often not cherished. That was the case with them. At first, they learned to read with Adam. Adam himself was not a smart person, although he was smarter than the two of them. However, Adam didn't like to read very much, so he had to recognize each word several times before he could learn it. This was exactly the same as them, so the two of them barely managed to learn all the words. Now that the two of them had become enlightened and smarter, when they looked at the slaves, they couldn't help but feel a little ashamed. Malin naturally saw this point, and she suddenly understood how correct Zhao Hai's decision was. These slaves didn't know how to read, so they had no culture. In this way, even if they wanted to contribute to the Buddha family, they couldn't help much because of their limited abilities. But as long as they recognized the words, they would be of greater help to the Buddha family in the future. Now the Buddha family needed everyone in the family to use their greatest strength to help the family, so that the Buddha family could be revitalized. Therefore, she taught very seriously. Chapter 39 New Features. Zhao Hai didn't pay attention to how well Merlin and the others were teaching. Zhao Hai knew that Merlin and the others wouldn't disappoint him. Besides, Merlin was an 8th level Grand Mage. In the Aksu Empire, how many students did such a mage not have? Merlin also had a few students, but they died in battle later when they followed Adam's father to fight. So Merlin still had a lot of teaching experience, and it was best for her to teach those slaves. What Zhao Hai was having a headache about now was the problem of those slaves eating. Yes, as long as the corn matured, they would have firewood, and there was also rice and flour in the warehouse, so there was no worry about eating. But Zhao Hai thought of a problem. After the fire burned, there would definitely be smoke, and the space here was only so big. If the smoke couldn't be discharged, it would stay in the space sooner or later, which was not a good thing. What Zhao Hai was most afraid of was what to do if the smoke caused pollution in the space, but he couldn't say these words. Could he let those slaves eat radishes every day? He could only let them try cooking first. If it really didn't work, he would try to reduce the number of times they cooked. When people could leave the space, he would find a way to discharge the smoke from the space. But Zhao Hai had another worry, which was the situation outside. Now he didn't know how the castle outside was. If it was destroyed by those magical beasts, then after they went out, they might not even have a place to live, which would be even more troublesome. After pacing around the house a few times, Zhao Hai couldn't think of a good solution, so he walked to the display screen at the head of the bed. Now the display screen was not turned on and looked dark. Zhao Hai didn't know how to turn on this display screen, so he had to whisper, "Open." But the display screen didn't respond at all. Zhao Hai was now in trouble. There was no obvious power button on this display screen, and he really didn't know what to do. Zhao Hai had to reach out and touch the display screen, but unexpectedly, as soon as his hand touched the display screen lit up, and then the logos of various tools, shops, and warehouses in the space appeared on the screen. This surprised Zhao Hai a bit. He remembered that when he opened this screen last time, there was only a shop logo and a brief introduction to the farm. He didn't expect that this time there would be more icons on the screen. Zhao Hai didn't care. He could easily control the things on this screen with his own mind, so there was no need to look at the things on it. At the same time, when Zhao Hai was about to turn off the screen, he suddenly noticed an icon. This icon was not any kind of thing on the farm, but rather a logo like a camera. Zhao Hai couldn't help but be stunned. It wouldn't be strange if this logo appeared on a computer, but it was a little strange for this logo to appear on this screen. Zhao Hai was stunned for a moment and clicked on the icon. He wanted to see what this icon was. As soon as his finger touched the icon immediately emitted a white light and shot into Zhao Hai's forehead. Zhao Hai's head immediately had a lot of information. Because too much information entered at once, Zhao Hai had to close his eyes and lie on the bed to digest the information properly. After a while, Zhao Hai digested all the information, and then opened his eyes and said dissatisfiedly, "Isn't it just something like a monitor? Why is it written so wordy?" Zhao Hai finally understood what the icon was for. The icon appeared because Zhao Hai had been to more places. It could be said to be something similar to a monitor, but its range was larger than that of a monitor. Now, because the space level was too low, he could only monitor things within 100 meters around the location where Zhao Hai entered the space. That is to say, from wherever Zhao Hai entered the space, he could see everything within 100 meters of the location where he entered the space on the display screen. As the space level increased, the range he saw would also become larger and larger. This was really like someone sending a pillow when he was sleepy. Zhao Hai was worried about how to know the situation outside, and such a thing appeared, which just solved his urgent need. Zhao Hai immediately sat up from the bed, walked to the screen, and touched the screen again with his hand. The screen immediately lit up, and then Zhao Hai clicked on the camera-like logo. Then the scene on the screen changed, and a three-dimensional image of the castle suddenly appeared on the computer. There was also a scale under the image of this castle, which condensed the scene of 100 meters into this small screen. Zhao Hai found that there were many green dots moving on the three-dimensional computer. Zhao Hai couldn't help but click on a green dot. The screen flashed, and then, like a lens quickly zooming in, a magical beast like a big rat appeared on the screen in the blink of an eye. This big rat-like magical beast looked around with shifty eyes, and Zhao Hai only realized now that this big rat-like magical beast was standing in the living room of the castle. Next to this big rat was a pile of rotten wood. Judging from the texture of the wood, it was the sofa that was originally placed in the living room. Zhao Hai looked at the screen carefully again and found that there was also the three-dimensional image that appeared at the beginning in the upper left corner of the screen. Zhao Hai also knew almost how to use this thing. He touched the three-dimensional image again with his hand. Sure enough, the screen immediately returned to the appearance of the three-dimensional image, with many green dots still shaking on it. Zhao Hai calculated and understood that the green dots represented either magical beasts or undead creatures. Zhao Hai clicked on the location of the living room again. This time he didn't click on the green dot. Sure enough, the picture changed, and the situation of the entire living room appeared on the screen. Now there were two big rat-like magical beasts standing in the living room. One was the one Zhao Hai had just seen, and the other was gnawing on the sofa. The sofas, small tables, and other things in the living room had all been completely destroyed. Several sofas had disappeared. It seemed that they had been gnawed by those rats. Zhao Hai looked at those big rats and swiped his finger across the screen unintentionally. As a result, the picture changed and suddenly turned to a room next to the living room. Zhao Hai was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect that this thing could still be used like this, and that he could switch scenes just by swiping his finger on the screen. This seemed to be even more useful than the monitors on Earth. Zhao Hai's finger swiped down from the top of the screen. Sure enough, the scene on the screen turned to the courtyard. Now the courtyard was very lively. Undead creatures and all kinds of magical beasts were tossing around in the courtyard. Those already woven straw mats or hay that had not been dried were being tossed around by these things, and the entire courtyard was full of them. Seeing this, Zhao Hai couldn't help but sigh and turned off the screen. Now that he knew that the outside was still a world of magical beasts, he couldn't rush out. At this moment, the space prompt sounded again. The corn has matured, please collect it as soon as possible. Zhao Hai immediately walked out of the house and found that Merlin and the others were teaching there, but now they all looked at Zhao Hai with some incomprehension. Zhao Hai didn't care. He knew that those people also heard the space prompt sound. He didn't care about many people, but just whispered, collect the corn and separate the corn stalks, corn cobs, and corn kernels for collection. As soon as he finished speaking, the basket for collecting things immediately flew up, and the corn in the field also flew towards the basket. In a short while, the corn from 2 acres of land was collected. Although those slaves had seen Zhao Hai collect radishes once, they were still very surprised to see Zhao Hai collect corn now. After Zhao Hai finished collecting the corn, he immediately took out the corn stalks and corn cobs, put them next to the marching stove, and took out some rice and flour, and then planted the corn on the ground again. Merlin also understood what Zhao Hai meant. Now they could cook. She put away the papers with words on them and said to the slaves, "Okay, everyone, let's cook and eat. After we eat, we will study again." Those slaves looked at the papers that Merlin put away with some reluctance. For them, being able to learn to rate was more important than anything else. Don't say it's just a meal that's not delicious for a while. Even if they don't eat today, they wouldn't have any opinion. Zhao Hai really didn't know what these slaves usually ate, but he had been eating bread these days, which made Zhao Hai feel a little tired of it. But now there was no oven in the space, so it was impossible to bake bread. Zhao Hai really wanted to see what Merlin would make for him to eat today. Sure enough, Merlin glanced at the things Zhao Hai took out, turned to Zhao Hai and said, "Young master, you have to take out some vegetables, ham, and fruit oil." Zhao Hai immediately took out the things Merlin wanted. Merlin left the rice, some vegetables, and fruit oil to the slaves, and she took the flour, some fruit oil, vegetables, and ham into the grass house. She remembered that there was a kitchen in Zhao Hai's grass house, and there were many kitchen utensils in it that she had not seen before. Zhao Hai really didn't know what Merlin was going to do. He also followed Merlin into the house. When Merlin started to knead the dough, Zhao Hai almost understood that Merlin might be making pancakes. Pancakes were still a food that Zhao Hai liked to eat. He didn't stay in the house any longer. Anyway, he couldn't help, so he turned around and went out of the house. As soon as he went out of the house, he was stunned. He thought that the slaves were making rice, but now it seemed that it was not the case at all. Those slaves were lighting a pot, then pouring fruit oil into the pot, and then putting the rice in and starting to stir fry. Zhao Hai's scalp was numb. It was the first time he had seen someone eat rice like this. Meg and the others didn't seem to be surprised at all, just watching those people cook there. As soon as Zhao Hai saw the appearance of the few people, he understood that the people here must often eat rice like this, so Meg and the others didn't have any surprising expressions. Chapter 40 Rice. Zhao Hai was depressed. It was the first time he had seen someone eat rice like this. Although this rice was not like rice, it was similar. The thought of white and fragrant rice being made like this made Zhao Hai feel like he was about to collapse. He also understood why Merlin didn't make rice for him. He was afraid that these people simply didn't know how to cook rice. If the rice was fried like this, it would definitely not taste good. That's why on the continent, only slaves eat this kind of rice. Just as he saw that one of the large stoves had just been lit and no oil had been added yet, Zhao Hai couldn't help but stop and immediately walked over to a female slave who was about to pour oil and said, "Wait, don't pour oil yet." When the female slave saw Zhao Hai's appearance, she thought she had made a mistake and immediately knelt down and said, "Please punish me, master." This stunned Zhao Hai, but he immediately recovered and shook his head. "I'm not going to punish you, you didn't do anything wrong. Now listen to me, don't pour oil into the pot yet. Use a basin to wash all of this rice. Looking at the size of this pot, it can probably hold a basin of rice. Wash the rice carefully, pour out the water, and then pour the rice into the pot." As he spoke, Zhao Hai took out a copper basin. The female slave didn't know what Zhao Hai wanted to do, but she immediately took the large copper basin from Zhao Hai's hand, filled it with rice, went to the spring to wash it carefully, and then brought the rice back and poured it into the pot. Zhao Hai continued, "This copper basin was just filled with most of the rice. Go and fill it with the same amount of water as rice, and pour the water into the pot." The female slave obediently went and filled a basin of water, poured it into the pot, and Zhao Hai asked her to fill another basin of water. Both basins of water were poured into the pot, which was almost full. Zhao Hai then found a slightly larger copper basin from the warehouse, turned it upside down on the pot, and then asked the female slave to light a fire under the pot. Zhao Hai just wanted to cook a meal of rice for them. Making rice is actually very simple. When Zhao Hai was on Earth, he lived alone, so he was very good at making rice. The ratio of rice to water is about 1 to 2, 1 pound of rice at about 2 pounds of water. But for this kind of pot, you have to add more water, because the bottom is directly firewood, and the fire is relatively strong, so Zhao Hai deliberately added an extra bowl of water and did not let the female slave use a strong fire, but used a steady fire to cook the rice. Meg and the others all stared at Zhao Hai curiously. They had boiled rice with water before, but at that time, they used rice as a kind of vegetable, an ingredient in soup, not rice. So she had really never seen what rice looked like. It doesn't take too long to cook rice. Before long, the fragrant smell of rice came out of the pot. You must know that the rice in the pot is all rice that has not been used with pesticides and fertilizers. It is pure green food, and the taste is naturally exceptionally good. When these slaves eat, they also have bowls, but their bowls are all made of wood. Each person is given a set. In addition to the pot, each person only has a wooden spoon, but it is enough. 10 people share a field kitchen stove, 1 wooden bowl per person, 1 wooden spoon, and 1 wooden cup. These are all the possessions of those slaves. Even so, those slaves felt very happy because they didn't even have these things before. While Zhao Hai was staring at the pot of rice, Merlin walked out of the grass hut and came to Zhao Hai's side. "Master, come and take a look. How do you light the cooking utensils in this kitchen?" Zhao Hai was stunned and immediately followed Merlin into the grass hut. He had never paid much attention to the cooking utensils in this kitchen before. Now when he took a look, good heavens, all the cooking utensils in this kitchen were electrical appliances, rice cookers, electric griddles, electric woks, everything was electric. And what made Zhao Hai speechless the most was that you simply didn't know where the wires for these things were connected. All the wires were tucked into the grass walls. There was a switch on the pot, unlike other things. But Zhao Hai knew how to use all these things. He glanced at what Merlin was going to make and was speechless again. Good heavens, Zhao Hai thought Merlin was going to make pancakes and stir-fry a dish. He didn't expect that Merlin was actually going to make that kind of pancake with the filling on the outside, pizza. But obviously, his pizza was different from the pizza Zhao Hai had seen before. It was not as beautiful as the pizza on Earth. He just made the dough into a cake shape and put the vegetables and ham on the cake. Zhao Hai was helpless. He was from China, and on Earth, Chinese cuisine was world-renowned. When he came to this world, he had not eaten a normal meal. Today, he thought he was going to eat pancakes, but the result was that this pizza was not like a pizza, and the cake was not like a cake. But Zhao Hai still told Merlin how to use those cooking utensils. These things were all electric, so they were naturally much more convenient. Merlin learned it as soon as he heard it. Seeing that Merlin knew how to use these cooking utensils, Zhao Hai didn't stay in the kitchen. He turned around and walked out of the kitchen again. At this time, the fragrant smell of rice from the pot of rice Zhao Hai made was even stronger, making people unable to help but sniff. Seeing Zhao Hai coming out, Meg immediately greeted him and whispered to Zhao Hai, "Master, this smells so good. How did you make it?" Zhao Hai smiled and said, "Didn't you see? It's just rice with water. In fact, the rice itself has a rice flavor. As long as you add the right amount of water, you can make soft and delicious rice. It's much better than frying rice directly. Then use fruit oil and those vegetables to make a soup, and you can have a delicious meal. It's much better than what they're doing now." Merlin looked at Zhao Hai with admiration and said, "Master knows so much, so amazing." Zhao Hai couldn't help but blush. He didn't know much. This was something everyone in China knew, but when he came here, it became his credit. Zhao Hai walked to the field kitchen stove where the rice was being cooked, listened to the sound inside, and felt that it should be almost ready. He picked up a corn stalk from the ground and used the corn stalk to push the copper basin on the pot. With a bang, the copper basin fell to the ground and a cloud of hot air rushed out of the pot. Zhao Hai couldn't help but step back. Along with this cloud of hot air, there was an even richer fragrance of rice. The smell was so fragrant, even more fragrant than the rice Zhao Hai had eaten on earth, making Zhao Hai unable to help but drool. After the hot air dissipated, the rice in the pot finally revealed its true colors. The rice was not as snow white as Zhao Hai had imagined, but slightly yellow, but it looked oily and smelled even more fragrant. Zhao Hai couldn't help but take out a spoon from the warehouse, scooped a spoonful of rice, and slowly put it into his mouth. Meg wanted to stop him, but Zhao Hai's movements were too fast. By the time she wanted to stop him, Zhao Hai had already put the rice into his mouth. Meg and the others couldn't help but stare at Zhao Hai. Zhao Hai felt a fragrant rice flavor fill his mouth. When he chewed the rice, it was full of elasticity, fragrant and soft. He couldn't help but close his eyes and slowly ate the rice. Then he opened his eyes and saw that the slaves and Meg were all looking at him. Zhao Hai couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed and said, "Don't look at me, everyone. Eat. If you think the fried rice you made earlier is not delicious, then don't eat it. You can make this rice again." Those slaves did not move immediately. When Zhao Hai saw their eager but hesitant expressions, he understood that it was because he was here, so these slaves did not dare to mess around. He couldn't help but smile slightly, turned his head and said to Meg, "Meg, let's go inside. Anyway, there is rice here. If they don't like to eat fried rice, they can make rice again." Meg was also a smart person and immediately understood the meaning of Zhao Hai's words. She immediately nodded and said, "Okay, master. Let's go inside and see how grandma's meal is doing." Zhao Hai couldn't help but smile slightly. He was now increasingly fond of this understanding, gentle and kind girl. The two pulled wood and stone into the grass hut. Ju and En did not follow. They also wanted to stay outside to taste how delicious this rice was. Seeing that Zhao Hai and Meg had entered the house, the slaves immediately surrounded the field kitchen stove. "One bite for you, one bite for me," and before long, they had eaten up a large pot of rice. Everyone ate and praised. After this pot of rice was eaten up, the slaves looked at each other, immediately dumped the original fried rice in the pot, and re-washed the rice and made rice. In the pot of the person who made the rice first, there was a thick layer of rice crust left. They had never seen this thing before. One of the slaves curiously picked up the rice crust, looked at it in his hand, and smelled it. The slightly burnt rice fragrance was even more tempting. In the end, he couldn't resist the temptation and took a bite. With this bite, his eyes lit up, and he quickly took a second bite. The pot used as a field kitchen stove was not small, so the rice crust was not small either, like a small shield. Naturally, one person could not finish it. The slave divided the rice crust among the people around him. Before the second pot of rice was ready, they were already full. Zhao Hai and Merlin had actually been lying on the door of the grass hut watching these slaves. Seeing that they were going to make rice for the second time, Zhao Hai immediately pushed the door open and walked out, saying to the slave, "Everyone, just make 7 pots of rice. That's enough to eat. Use the remaining 3 pots to make soup. When the rice is ready, the soup will be ready too. Everyone can eat both rice and dishes." When those slaves heard Zhao Hai say this, they knew that Zhao Hai had been watching them, and they couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed, but they immediately did as Zhao Hai said. They really admired this master to death now, and they were also extremely grateful. Many people cried when they ate the rice. They had never eaten such delicious food in their lives. Not to mention them, even their families had never eaten such delicious food. They were really too excited.
Thank you so much for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the story, so please leave a comment below. And if you want more fanfiction audio, be sure to like and subscribe. See you in the next one.